Lahore.
Alright, so here we are in front of the elephants.
It was a pretty sunset.
Howdy, and welcome back to Film and Season 7. It feels like it's been forever since I've done an episode, but in reality, I graduated college only a short 5 months ago, and I've been working on this project, this episode, ever since. I told myself I'd get this thing out by June, but it's kind of just coming out when the regular fall lineup of episodes usually comes out, so I guess it all works out. But yeah, I realized back then that was not going to happen because this is easily the most in-depth and expansive project I have done for the show to date, because I decided to watch every Leonardo DiCaprio narrative feature-length film performance, and I decided to rank each and every one if you see the title. But yeah, those of you who might be new to the show, or at least who are not new to the show and understand what this is Film and / Film Asterisk. The name has changed a little bit. And that's just to kind of incorporate the fact that Film and was a show at Champlain College that I graduated from. So obviously I want to keep the backlog of the Film and episodes, the Connor era, season 5 and 6, but I kind of decided when I was going into the end of season 6 that I wanted to keep this going. I wanted to have an outlet to talk about movies and talk with my friends about movies and do the Andes, which we get to keep the name Andes, which is very nice, even though it'll be Film Asterisk only from now on. But yeah, basically this channel will serve to be an archive of the original Film and run from 2019 to 2022, and any extraneous Film Asterisk episodes we get moving forward, which is obviously going to be very staggered and all over the place because I have other things going on. I have a life, so I never know when one of these is going to drop, when it's going to show up. But I always told myself I wanted this to be the first episode that I make when I came back to the show. And what's funny is it feels like I never really left, but I did for like maybe a couple weeks, and then I started this project in June, and now it's October, so here we are. But yeah, I'm really excited to just get into this ranking. I have a beautiful little graphic. There it is. That's the graphic. That's going to be our little thing that we look at for the next however long this episode is. And we're just going to go into it. But yeah, something interesting I realized early on in this project is that if you ask someone to name as many Leonardo DiCaprio films as they can, I honestly bet you they could name nearly half of them. Because when Leo has been in a movie, it has most often in his career been an event, or a box office hit, or a memorable performance. I mean, I myself probably would have been able to name like 17 or 18 of them. So I was interested in the other half, kind of the dark side of the moon that is Leo's career, both forgotten gems and forgotten flops. So since 1991, Leonardo DiCaprio has been in 30 films over about 30 years. It's like roughly one film a year. And it didn't just take all summer for me to like watch them all. It also just took me a while to track them down because some of these are hard to find. Seriously. Like, someone asked me actually why I started this project, and I honestly couldn't give them a straight answer. I really couldn't remember, but here's my best guess. It was like April of this year. And I think I was watching Romeo and Juliet, the Leo Romeo and Juliet with my sister, and I kind of thought to myself, like, Leo has so many notable roles. He got famous movies. iconic moments, I sure would like to know what it feels like to see his entire career front to back. Like his meteoric rise to superstardom. Like what is his complete journey? Because I've only ever seen pieces. And that's kind of the thesis of the video. Like what is the step-by-step progression of Leo's career? And what are the highlights and lowlights, in my opinion? I also tried to create this ranking without looking at any other ranking that exists. Like I really tried to make how I honestly feel personally about these performances outside of the public perception. And it helps with a lot of the obscure movies that no one is talking about. But yeah, these are just me and my thoughts, what I kind of look for in a performance from Leonardo DiCaprio. And I guess, if I can kind of describe what I was looking for, if I'm trying to analyze how I watched these movies and these performances from him, I'm kind of like, well, is he expanding on something? Is he doing something new, something adventurous, or is he like diving deeper into like a type of character or a narrative he's done before, but doing it better or worse or the same? Like kind of just comparing the past to the present and the future of what his career is, and kind of putting it all into a little jambalaya and then seeing how that feels as a movie. So I kind of had So I kind of had two ideas on how I could present this ranking. I could go top to bottom, just my 30 to 1, kind of jumping around his career, or I could go chronological and go from his first film to his latest. And I think for the sake of my thesis, I went with the latter. And I want to be able to tell the story of this actor step by step and fill in the ranking as I go along. So slowly, we'll see this grid I've created fill up until we reach present day. Now, I also knew going in, there must be a few Leo performances I wouldn't like. In fact, there were already a couple I'd seen and not enjoyed, so I had an idea, kind of an asterisk to my presentation of this episode. Haha, film asterisk. Okay, before we start off with Leo's first movie, I want to cover my 3 least favorite films of his, numbers 28, 29, and 30. I want to get all my least favorites out of the way, and then we can just head through normally. And man, I just realized I'm going to say Leo a lot in this episode. But don't worry, it'll still be less times than the names Rose or Jack I'll said in Titanic, so we're all good. If you want to understand that joke, I'll link the video below that I'm referencing. Please check it out. It's from the Titanic Supercut. So, of course, let's begin at the natural start.
My name is Flip, and I am hip. I'm not your ordinary microchip. Watch my lips, and I will whip up some street-safe, street-smart safety tips.
All right.
Excuse me, that was not the ending. This is.
If you want to see, just press a key. Now let's get started with Jeremy.
Me?
I'm kidding. Let's start somewhere else. Now, again, talking about these least 3 favorite movies, part of my, I guess, inspiration for that is I was trying to avoid ending the episode on his latest film, which is 2021's Don't Look Up. I did not like that movie. And I remember feeling, I want to avoid the ending that like me and Connor were stuck in with our Jennifer Lawrence tier list from season 3, because we ended with Red Sparrow. And it was easily, I mean, for both of us, kind of like our least favorite performance from her. The movie was weird and janky, and things didn't really line up, and we ended on a low note. And I didn't really want to do that here. So this is kind of this idea of, I still want to make this a fun journey instead of being like, knowing Don't Look Up is at the end of all of this, and we just have to talk about it for a minute and be like, I didn't like it. So we're starting off with number 28 of 30, 2021's Don't Look Up. My least favorite movie of 2021 in general. And it was also the last movie I saw that year. I ended 2021 on the lowest possible note. And this movie is the bane of my existence. And it's a bummer because the cast is super stacked, you know? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of excitement for anyone who had seen like the marketing to this video, because it was like, oh, it's got like environmental themes. It'll be maybe like Adam McKay from The Big Short and Vice. That could be good. And just this amazing cast that he had assembled for this slightly improvised film. Yeah, this slightly improvised film. Maybe it would be good. But, I mean, at the end of the day, for me, what gets put together here is like this messy, mean-spirited, unfunny pablum of critiques on modern society through like just the condescending and lowest common denominator apocalypse comedy for the social media age. And boy, what a terrible way to end the year. I mean, when it comes to Leo, when it comes to him, I mean, at least he's just given little to work with, and the film rarely plays to his strengths, and it's a bummer. I mean, I don't think he's terrible himself, but he's certainly not doing anything interesting with the role. And the script certainly doesn't support much, mostly because it's barely a script. The film, throughout its advertisement, touted its emphasis on improvisation, which makes it even more infuriating that the film was given an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay. But yeah, whatever. I got the sense that this is the kind of film that was really fun and interesting for everyone making it. Like, it looks like a really fun movie to be on set. And then they went into the editing booth and just kind of whipped something together, slapped some VFX when they needed it, and just called it a day, as if to say, hey, no one cares in 2021, so why should we? So I'm getting this one out of the way. But listen, Leo, he's trying, but what he's given is not much at all, and it's painful, and he kind of flounders, but whatever. Moving on. Next up, in the number 29 spot, is actually another recent inclusion in his filmography, surprisingly. 2011's J. Edgar. Yeah, this film for me is rough. Just as films go, it struck me as a pretty forgettable, paint-by-the-numbers biopic in some respects. But for Leo specifically, in many ways, it feels like he's just kind of treading water. Like this is something we've seen him do before, and just better. The Aviator, Catch Me If You Can, Basketball Diaries, This Boy's Life. I mean, if we're talking biopics, I mean. In this list, the times Leo struggles most for me personally is watching him repeat aspects of other performances, but to a lesser effect. And this may be the worst offender, because you'll realize that a lot of the films Leo has done in his life are period pieces, and of those period pieces, some of them are biopics where he is the character the film is about. He's usually a leading man. So we've seen this. This is what, the fifth or sixth movie of him being the subject of a biopic? Leo's character work seems just to kind of falter here. I mean, he does an accent and talks in a way that seems like he's going for just dramatic speaking rather than sounding like a real person, and it sounds more like a stage voice. The emphasis, the voice, the dialogue, and the makeup too. It's all kind of comes together for this relatively uninspired, clunky performance. But hey, Armie Hammer is amazing though. Heck yeah. All right, moving on. Finally, we have number 30, the worst film in Leo's career, in my opinion, The Low Point. Now, I didn't plan it this way, but in fact, it is not only the last film of these bottom three, it also marks the beginning of our ranking, because we are now discussing Leo's first feature film ever, 1991's Critters 3. A quick background on Leonardo DiCaprio. He was born in LA. He's always interested in acting as a kid, supported by his father to persevere in the industry, and eventually got quite a few commercial spots, and then TV spots, shows like Roseanne, The Outsiders, Growing Pains, until receiving his first film role, which we are starting off with right now, 1991's Critters 3. It's pretty obvious to look at this film and see it as like the odd one out in Leo's filmography. It is the third egregious installment of an already kind of campy 80s film series, and it is the closest we may get to seeing Leo in an 80s-esque movie, which is kind of fun, but also not really, because this movie kind of blows. I understand why Leo kind of disowns this movie in a way, in the same way Kubrick disowns Spartacus to an extent, where a film like Critters 3 doesn't really represent Leo's overall oeuvre. It's not really a role he sought out or wanted to play at this age, I don't think, and I can see why. He's not really doing much with the role, and he certainly isn't given much to work with, other than being an unwilling stepson to a jerk of a stepdad until he accidentally locks the stepdad in some critters and they tear him apart. Yeah, I don't mind spoiling the deaths here. I'm recommending you don't watch this movie. And despite me saying that, it's true that I don't recommend you watch this movie. And if somehow you avoid my warning, there are some legitimate, unique, and bright spots in this film. Like, some scenes are lit with this red road flare that, well, there's this character in the film, a tenant who's basically like half discount Ripley from Alien, half Frances McDormand character, and she carries a red flare when the lights go out, and those scenes are very visually striking. They look pretty cool. Plus, some of the dialogue is like laughably funny. Like, come out wherever you are. Your landlord is here to evict you. Or, what about a meat cleaver? That's a good line. Oh my God, I'm bleeding. Great delivery from the apartment complex neighbor. And he left. Whoa, just like one of those westerns. So that one's at the end. A lot of like just funny line deliveries that make me enjoy this. But here is the final issue of this movie for me. It's campy, weird, treading water, and unentertaining. But the thing is, I would argue it just doesn't go far enough with the camp. There are moments in the film that are so ridiculous and purposefully humorous that it's almost commenting on the film's own ridiculous existence. But to be honest, any scene with the critters themselves, with the effects and the music and everything, terrible. Don't need it. It sucks. Leo isn't acting so much as he's just showing up, and I'm very, very happy to report this is the one and only instance we will have this issue during probably this entire ranking. I mean, thank goodness it's the worst, because it's also a perfect segue into the rest of his career, his first movie, and it's only uphill, I promise you. So next up, we have an interesting one. Now, in this project, when I was going through these, there were 3 films that I could not find anywhere to stream. Not even like a weird pirated version, so I had to head to every place in town that had even a chance of selling DVDs in the hopes they would have it. The 3 films in question were 1995's Basketball Diaries, 1995's Total Eclipse, and our next film, 1992's Poison Ivy. Now, I went to every Goodwill, every record store, every library. I found plenty of other performances. Like, I was honestly surprised how many other DVDs of his that I found. But I was able to find Basketball Diaries at the local college library and was able to rent it that way. Thank you, St. Mike's Library. Well, thank you, my sister, for renting it out for me, because she's an alum. Anyways, but Poison Ivy was a very difficult one to track down, kind of screeching the project to a halt in about mid-September, which is why this is coming out like maybe a week or 2 later than I wanted to, because I couldn't find freaking Poison Ivy. But finally, a friend of mine was actually able to track down a pirated version on the internet, and I was finally able to continue the Leo journey with 1992's Poison Ivy, starring Drew Barrymore. And how excited I was to hear that Leo and Drew Barrymore had worked together before. Basic plot. A seductive teen befriends an introverted classmate and schemes her way into the lives of her wealthy family, which really is the perfect premise for this film, because, man, Ivy, who's Drew Barrymore's character, she's the lead, is really here to make a bad family situation even worse, with peer pressure, backstabbing, gaslighting, and seduction. And it does really fit into the 1990s cool, post-80s, edgy, punky VHS aesthetic that many movies from this era kind of fit into, when Hollywood was trying to write teen culture in the 90s. But this, in many ways, is another exciting installment of a genre we have discussed before on this show, erotic thrillers. Similar to the film we discussed in the classic Season 4 episode of Film and, talking about 1998's Wild Things. Classic episode from Film and. Poison Ivy is much more during the peak of the genre, where we were kind of talking about the dying breaths of the genre with Wild Things. But I would argue, this 1992, this is the peak of the erotic thriller genre, because Basic Instinct, The Crying Game, and only a year before, 1993's Indecent Proposal and Sliver came out. And there's some interesting things about the film and its placement in film history. This is probably the most notable role of a relative dry spell of box office hits for Drew Barrymore, in between E.T. and Firestarter in the early 80s, and then 1995's Batman Forever. And she plays a pretty powerful, interesting character, but I'm getting off topic because we're here discussing another performance, that of the then 16-year-old Leonardo DiCaprio. I went into this movie blind, as I try and do with most films in a project like this. And yeah, I start the movie and I'm writing all these notes about the film. I'm talking about what I was just saying with erotic thrillers and picking up on that. And I'm like 45 minutes in and we have yet to see Leo. And I realize, right, this is going to be like a really minimal second or third act role for Leo, I guess. That makes sense. It's early days for him. And then a bit later, I check in, and I'm 63 minutes into this 88-minute film, 94 minutes if you include the censored scenes, by the way, and still no Leo. 70 minutes later, he's still not there. 80 minutes in, the finale of the film, no Leo, no nothing, and then, finally, after all this waiting for my boy Leonardo, the movie ends. Yeah, so I did some snooping, and the role credited as Guy for Leonardo DiCaprio in IMDb and Letterboxd in 1992's Poison Ivy is actually a blink and you'll miss it extra spot at the, I'm not making this up, the 4-minute 20-second mark of the film as a high schooler exiting the building with his friends. So by default, this is what I call officially the worst performance of Leo's film career, because it doesn't exist and I was betrayed and misled. I thought at least he'd have like some dialogue or even just a line or two or something on par with like Billy Zane's role in Back to the Future as one of like Biff's cronies. But no, let me show you the best image I could get of Leo's air quotes role in Poison Ivy. Yeah. And I'm only like 80% sure that's him. It is a 3-second clip of him walking across screen, and he's blurred the entire time. So this is easily my number 30. No debate. Sorry about lying. Everything's shifting now, but I wanted to recreate my disappointment for you all. And I know I said it was all uphill before, but now it's all uphill, okay? We're moving on away from Poison Ivy to 1993. And this next movie, this is often the film that Leo himself considers as his first movie, his first major character, and his first legitimate Hollywood production that feels like, it's a step up in his career. And it's pretty easy to see why. I mean, it's a biting period piece about a single mother and her son moving from Western town to Western town, escaping bad exes and no job prospects, only to land in the rural town of Concrete, marrying the most recent and worst in a long line of love interests, Robert De Niro's Dwight. And of course, I'm talking about This Boy's Life. Okay, so in my head, I think I was legitimately trying to retroactively enjoy Critters 3 more, because I really didn't want Leo's career to start on such a low note. So I kind of told myself that because Critters 3 ends with Leo's stepdad dying, and it's just him and his mom left, it seems pretty interesting that his first movie ends with Leo and his mom alone, and Leo's next movie picks right back up on that exact note, him and his mom alone traveling around the country. I mean, okay, that is not the case. This is not a weird, like, retroactive sequel to Critters 3. This is not Critters 4 or Critters, like, 3.5, but it's a very different movie, This Boy's Life, but also a much better one. But I just kind of wanted to give myself something interesting and fun to think about, as if, oh, here we go, he's literally moving across the country, it's all connected. But here, the film is critiquing the constrictive and twisted society that was 1950s America. The film is rife with misogyny and homophobia, class struggle, gender inequality, nationalism, subpar educational institutions, marital nightmares. They're literally all packed in here. And boxing our main two characters portrayed by Ellen Barkin and her son, Leonardo DiCaprio, in a corner the entire film. The world is against them, and despite Leo's ne'er-do-well demeanor, he secretly longs to be a better boy, or so he thinks. It seems what he really wants, but can't admit, is that he wants the world to be a better place for him to grow up in. He feels that the situations are wrong around him, but he has no power to change the environment, so if he changes himself, perhaps it'll get better. Both him and his mom deserve a life of support and independence, but they are entangled in Robert De Niro's character's life, and it seems later on that this is the man Leo may grow up to be if nothing changes, particularly if he doesn't have his mother there to steer him right. Overall, for me, it's definitely like a very average performance from Leo. Like, this is the epitome of, man, this kid's got potential. He isn't yet to like really break through with roles that cater, I think, more to his strengths. Robert De Niro drops a pretty unique performance himself. A very kind of cool, different character work for him, which I like. And Jonah Blechman, too, as Arthur Gale, really good performance. And also Ellen Barkin. Like, what's funny is nearly every performance in this film is great, and Leo is just good. And that's not a bad thing. I think this character of youth dealing with inner demons and is in a bad family situation, which we'd see in like Basketball Diaries, Malvin's Room, even Romeo and Juliet to an extent, is a character he eventually perfects later on in the 90s. But this is the beginning of some really cool stuff he does with acting. And if we're talking highlights of Leo's performance here, this film does a really interesting thing by separating the second and third acts by a 2-year time jump. And that way, Leo was able to play 2 years older. And the way they make him look this way as well, it's pretty cool. Plus, who has joined his friend group in the film but a young, unknown Tobey Maguire? After this film, him and Tobey actually become close friends, and this is the first of 3 very exciting collaborations they have together, all of which we will be discussing later down this list. So, This Boy's Life, number 22. All right, next up. What's Eating Gilbert Grape? Often the earliest film people know from Leo's career, and when I ask around, it's usually this or Titanic. And it's a pretty fascinating film in general. I mean, Leo being the main supporting character behind Johnny Depp's Gilbert Grape, a directionless post-teen trapped as the breadwinner for his 2 sisters, stay-at-home mom, and brother, played by DiCaprio. I can understand the hype that comes with this performance, but the character seems only as strong as its script. And I think Leo really capitalized on having an amazing environment and like writer to create this character. And yeah, I think it's a great performance from him. A top 5 performance, actually. Filling in this awesome top row with all these big boxes, let's go. This one lands at number 5. This is a pretty amazing performance from him. I think it's the first time I think the power of Leo's acting comes to the forefront in this kind of way, because it's easy for him to be the slick, exciting, baby-faced teen heartthrob with intense eyes and strong elocution and exciting spatial charisma. That's kind of his birth-given gift. He's always had that. But this is Leo in like just much more vulnerable space here, and he has the wherewithal to play it as such. It's easily one of his most human performances, but equally it's just in one of those most human movies he's ever been in. There's no like larger-than-lifeness about this film that you'd see in basically any performance in his career past 2002. This is one of those universal stories, but also is discussing themes of obesity, loss, mental health, American consumerism. Like, it's really commenting on so many facets of small-town America, and it's head-spinning. So, what do I think is Eating Gilbert Grape? A whole lot of stuff. Watch it and find out. All right, we're moving on. This one is one of my favorites, but we are moving on to Leo's 5th movie, Basketball Diaries. And as I write this, I'm amazed to say it's only his 5th. We're 5 movies in now, because he's clearly punching way above his weight here. The amount of teen actors who I imagine wish they could do what Leo did with his run in the 90s, it's pretty legendary, and we're only like less than halfway through it. But yeah, I mean, Basketball Diaries. This is Leo's edgy 90s New York City teen drama, a film obsessed with the self-importance of the New York underground alt scene, and yet at equal points distanced from it. Because though based on real experience of writer Jim Carroll, that's who Leo plays, it takes place before his entrance into that scene as a musician and writer/poet. And I think it kind of shows what a remarkable film this is, just looking at the crew. I mean, this is the directors, writers, and cinematographers' basically like only notable credit of any kind. The creative team really feel like one-hit wonders, because no one does much else with movies other than like this one movie. Like, this is their film, this is their statement. But man, what a hell of a scene this film starts off with. Leo's character Jim on all fours getting paddle spanked by an Irish priest, and we are off swinging right away. And also, man, Leo is just so young at this point. He is so skinny in that basketball penny. This film apparently takes place in the mid-1960s, but I didn't even pick up on that while watching the movie. As far as I could tell, it was a contemporary, like, mid-90s narrative. And this brings me to one of the biggest talking points when it comes to Basketball Diaries. It's maybe one of the most 90s films Leo has ever done, in the sense that it is the best example of 90s styles of filmmaking of any of his films. I mean, you've got the gritty, mature themes, the handheld shots, the fisheye lens, the punk rock music, the urban setting. Overall, just a more realist, edgy drama than the neon sugarcoating of the 1980s films that it was kind of directly sort of rebelling against this decade. The film can easily sort of be chopped up into two halves, pre and post suspension. At the midpoint, Leo gets suspended from his high school, and that's when everything kind of spirals out. And these two halves have very different priorities, in my opinion. Teenager Jim Carroll is a drug-addicted high school basketball player who regularly gets into mischief with his friends Pedro, Mickey, and Neutron on the streets of New York City and at school. Outside of basketball, he shows an artistic interest in writing, keeping his work in his journal, expressing his thoughts, and creating poetry. He's a gritty urban youth craving escape from a bad home/school situation. So this first half, as I see it, is a pretty salient depiction of Leo's character as a dissection of masculinity and kind of the institutions that support his reactive behavior, basketball and Catholic prep school, which is a hell of a combo. He's very much the main character, but it's not truly about him, or at least not yet. At first, he is the more passive character or protagonist that we are supposed to see the film through. He is our eyes, and I absolutely love that, because we see the flaws of this character in such a personable way, and yet you can tell there is a better person inside Jim yearning to be supported. But not even Jim knows to foster that half of his life yet. And some immediate impressions, all the supporting performances being fantastic. A familiar face shows up, Juliette Lewis, Johnny Depp's love interest in Gilbert Grape, except now she is very much matured from that cleaner role to become a drug-addicted prostitute on the streets of New York that Leo picks on, and she serves as a cautionary tale in a way for what Leo will face in the second half of the film. A bizarre tonal switch from the playful relationship their characters have in the previous film together, Gilbert Grape. And with this in mind, they spend a lot of 1994 being on two pretty immersive film sets together, and beyond that, we have Mark Wahlberg, yes, a 1995 Wahlberg in only his third movie ever. There's also Michael Imperioli, who plays Bobby, Jim's high school friend with leukemia, who drops maybe my favorite performance of the film. I mean, he's not a huge part of the film's story, but for what scenes he's in, he really steals the show. He is amazing. We also learn pretty quick that Leo is the narrator of the film, and his narration is pretty frequent, but despite my apprehension to narration, the film pulls it off remarkably well, and Leo's additions to the film as an inner monologue or writing his poetry is pretty insightful and beautiful, despite the ugly, overwhelming world he lives in. And yeah, this film has a lot of graphic honesty of just a teen boy trying to understand his masculine adolescence. He's tackling such mature content in the first half of the film, but yeah, teenage boys all that messed up and vulgar when put in the right situations. And with the Catholic prep school lifestyle, with the over-competitive environment of high school basketball, pushing it all together into a mix of adrenaline, testosterone, filtered into situations of societal expectation, anger, sex, death, and so much more. It's really something to behold. This is like a youth movie, let me tell you. A movie for the youth. But yeah, I mean, there are so many other scenes that go one after another feeding into like each of these. You know, Leo, Marky Mark, and his friends are out of school, cliff jumping and mooning the Hudson River boat tours on the cliffs, which, might I add, the cliff jumping stunts are amazing. And the scene is yet another example of, despite the dialogue being kind of exaggerated, it is rooted in like this very honest depiction of adolescence. Right after, his friend Neutron brings him over to a nice apartment complex to hook up with two identical twins. And Leo is kind of nervous and sheepish with the girl who goads him into snorting coke and having sex. And it's funny to think that here, Leo is the nervous one, while his friend is like gung-ho about like hooking up with this other person. But only years later, we get introduced to what I would argue is Basketball Diaries' sister film, but more on that later. Let me say now, it struck me right after this scene. I like the poetry, like a lot. I think it adds so much to this film. It's only one part of the narration, but man, it's just so insightful. And I realized Leo is once again dropping an amazing performance, like so early in his career. But I look at what he has to work with, a stellar script adaptation and a fully realized vision of who this character is from everyone involved. And some of the imagery in this film is insane as well. Like Ernie Hudson and Leo talking to each other when when they're doing their pickup basketball games, basically speaking right to the camera. Leo's dream sequence, like the first time he does heroin, insane. The spiraling fisheye lens near the end when Leo is in Ernie Hudson's apartment, crazy. And another cool part of the film is that Leo starts out, as I said, a bit more of a passive observer for us to watch the events of the film occur. But the further we get in, the more his narration and writing takes priority, and perhaps it's his inner loneliness and despair that fuels it, because by nearly the halfway point, it's almost evolved into a biopic, which it is, as it feels like we're watching the book that the film is based on get written. And usually lesser movies wait until like the last 3 minutes of the film to be like, oh, this was the story, and now he's going to write the book about it, because it was like real kind of thing, you know? The film is over and the protagonist is like, whoa, what a journey, I got to write about this kind of a thing, you know? It's the there and back again ending from Lord of the Rings. But instead of that, the writing of the book itself is sort of the main silent story of the film the entire time. But hey, as much as I love aspects of this film, I have a couple issues with it too. You know, I'd say the second half isn't nearly as strong as the first. The post-suspension half just becomes a bit more cliche or textbook, I guess, in the depiction of rock-bottom lifestyle as a drug addict. I think the uniquity and nuance is kind of gone, but it feels more Hollywood and preachy rather than sticking to like the twisted realism of the first half. But that may be just because there's a very obvious and intentional tone and perspective shift after the first half. But there are some highlights too. Leo, Marky Mark, and their friend Pedro all fall into a dangerous spiral of drug addiction and are desperate and decide to rob an ice cream parlor. And the crazy trichotomy of Pedro making himself a sundae, Leo violently slamming on an empty register, and Marky Mark finding a gun and holding it up to his head screaming is truly something to behold. This film is completely bonkers sometimes. It really pulls some punches that I honestly respect. The one scene that does really hit me hard in the portion is probably when Leo returns to his mother's house begging for help and for money for drugs. For me, this is easily Leo's best scene. I mean, it's heartbreaking, and despite pleas and his breakdown being so enthralling, I mean, maybe it's some of the best stuff I've ever seen Leo do. I mean, it was pretty impactful. I don't know, his spitting and crying and cracking voice regressing almost to like a pouting child, despite maturing clearly way too quick as a drug-addled teen in mid-century New York City.
Ma? Are you in there, Ma? Ma, is that you?
Yeah.
Ma? Ma? Are you there?
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, Ma. Hi. Hi. Listen, I need you to help me out, all right? I need you to give me some money. Okay? I need you to give me like $5, like $20, something like that, because I'm in some trouble. Ma? Do you hear me, Ma?
Yeah, I hear you. I can't help you.
Okay, listen. What you gotta do is give me some money, okay?
Jim, I can't do that.
Why not? Mom, you know I'm not gonna do anything with it. I need to go out of town for a little while because I got into some trouble and I need some help with it. Okay, so you gotta give me some money, Mom. Can you hold my hand?
Yeah,
Mom?
hold your hands.
Mom, can you give me some money, please? Mom, can you give me some money, please? Stop fucking around!
I can't.
Mom, give me some fucking money, please! What are you doing? I'm your son!
I don't have any.
Mom, don't fuck around like this! Give me some money! Mom! Come on! Let me in the fucking door!
If anyone remembers me and Connor's season 4 episode on the 2021 film Cherry, this feels like the film Cherry could have been. Well, probably what it should have been, except the film doesn't need to exist because Basketball Diaries is kind of a timeless narrative with a drug addiction cautionary tale message that Cherry only tried to get across. So let's call this Proto Cherry. It just feels like the movie hinges on Leo, and he has such a good grip on his character, even when it becomes almost too much about him near the end. He's crafted this striking acting performance that ends up being one of his best, easily of his 90s run, if not his entire career. And thank goodness he has highlights throughout his whole career. It keeps this episode exciting for me. So this ranks again in the top 5, easily one of Leo's best early performances. I place it right above Gilbert Grape at number 4. All right, next up, let's move on to the second of 3 films in the year of our Lord 1995 from the director of The Evil Dead and the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy, Sam Raimi, and his Western film, The Quick and the Dead. I watched this for the first time in May of 2021. It was, in fact, the final movie that me and Steve, of Radio Rialto fame, of Hulkback Mountain fame, of Best Picture 75 fame, watched during his college career and before he moved away back home. We were in his apartment in Winooski, furniture virtually gone, save a couch, a chair, a television, and the table it sat on. We threw up a little movie called The Quick and the Dead, and I didn't know anything about the movie except that Sam Raimi directed, and we had watched an earlier film of his, Army of Darkness, like 2 days earlier. Plot. A mysterious woman gunslinger, Ellen, played by Sharon Stone, saunters into the town of Redemption looking for revenge. Her father was killed by the town's sadistic mayor, Herod, played by Gene Hackman, who was in the midst of organizing a quick draw tournament. The lady enters, joining a cast of miscreants and outlaws for a brutal competition in which the loser dies. Among the competitors is a young Russell Crowe and the Kid, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, an upstart who has his own score to settle with Herod. So, however, did we get such a stacked cast of young, exciting talent paired with this director? Well, we can thank the producer of this film, Sharon Stone. I gotta give the utmost props for Sharon on this one. I mean, this movie is fan-freaking-tastic, and it's largely the cast to thank. For Russell Crowe, Raimi found Crowe to be bold and challenging. He reminds me of what we imagine the American cowboy to have been like, and on working with Raimi, Russell Crowe later described the director as sort of like the fourth stooge. Sony Pictures was dubious over Sharon Stone's choice of Russell Crowe because he was not a famous actor in the mid-90s. Matt Damon was actually offered the role of the Kid, Leo's character, but declined. Sam Rockwell, a young Sam Rockwell, auditioned for the Kid, a role which ended up going to Leo. And Sony was also hesitant about DiCaprio's casting, and as a result, Sharon Stone paid DiCaprio's salary herself. And man, I am glad she did, because to be honest, this actually ranks as my number 2 on this list. Potentially the biggest shock of this episode, that the number 2 spot goes to not one of his 20 leading performances, but in fact a supporting role from early on in his career. But if I can describe this film as anything, it's my comfort movie for Leo. I mean, this, for me, is Leo's youthful, playful, exciting persona at its peak in a riveting, bracket-structured film of cowboy shootouts. It's awesome. Like, it's great. A surprisingly impactful performance from a super young Leo, hot off the heels of Gilbert Grape and Basketball Diaries, and at this point in his career, he started to travel cross-country for his roles regularly at this point. I mean, this, for me, this feels like his true teenage film. And what's insane is he became a lead so early in his career with Basketball Diaries, Romeo and Juliet, Titanic, so a supporting performance from DiCaprio is rare. The closest one that we have in the modern day, I would argue, is Django Unchained, because, you know, Jamie Foxx is the unequivocal protagonist of the film, the literal titular character, and I'd consider, honestly, Christoph Waltz and Kerry Washington more integral to the film, whereas Leo's Calvin Candy is more positioned as, like, the final boss at the end of a long bounty hunter road. But back to Quick and the Dead. Back to a different Western. Bill Gribben of Pop Matters said, "The Quick and the Dead was a Western in the days when the genre was more or less struggling for life, the 90s. In addition, it starred a yet-to-be-hot Leonardo DiCaprio and a question mark named Russell Crowe, who, fun fact, would work together again, but not for another 15 years when they'd both reached superstardom. We'll talk about that one. And what I may respect about this film is it's kind of working as Sharon Stone's passion project to focus on quality filmmaking that is fun and engaging. And man, like, Sam Raimi is somehow the perfect man to bring some pep in everyone's Western step. I mean, it's the bond DiCaprio and Crowe were also able to form thanks to their casting is amazing. I think overall, just the interactions between all the characters on screen is pretty electric. That's why this film works in so many ways. Leo actually said in an interview once that I worked with Russell when I was 18 years old. He did Romper Stomper, and I just did a film called What's Eating Gilbert Grape. And here we were converging on this big budget movie with Gene Hackman and Sharon Stone, and we kind of forged a friendship there because we didn't know where to fit in. We didn't belong to the character actor group or the movie star group. And I remember talking to him a lot about movies back then, the type of actor he wanted to be, the type of films he liked. And there's something honest about Leo's uneasiness at this time. I mean, he was doing great work as an actor, but he was still very unsure of his future. I mean, he's only like 19 here, yet his swaggering demeanor in films like Quick and the Dead would never let it show. Overall, Leo's the kid has a charisma and charm that eventually leads to some negative consequences in the film, but I love him as an addition to this already amazing movie, and I'm happy to place this so highly on this list. A little biased? Yeah, sure. But it's honestly how I feel when I look at this Leo. This is the ultimate teenage pre-Titanic performance. So moving on. Next up is a film that may be one of the least known pit stops in Leo's early career, and yet maybe one of the most telling and intriguing. 1995's Total Eclipse. This is, in fact, the final film I watched for this project. Despite running through all of these in order for this episode, I very much watched them out of order. So finally sitting down here and discussing a chronological journey of this actor's career, like, this is honestly quite interesting for me. But yeah, I found a DVD copy of this on eBay. That's how I had to find this movie. And like 2 weeks later, there it is. There's a photo. I was finally able to finish Leo's filmography. Now, Total Eclipse is a gripping period piece about French poetry in the 1870s. Youthful poet Paul Verlaine, played by David Thewlis, drinks absinthe and neglects his devoted wife, Mathilde, played by Romain Bollinger. Author Rimbaud, played by Leonardo, is an even younger and more celebrated poet, entering their lives, and he kind of alienates the couple even further, haughtily mocking their bourgeois lifestyle even as he benefits from it. Mathilde stands by Paul, but she cannot prevent the poet's self-destructive descent. Rimbaud, compared to the urban intelligentsia of Paris, begins as an uncouth, mannerless ruffian country boy, but him and his compatriot, played by Professor Lupin, David Thewlis, spend their time musing on society, drinking absinthe, and growing ever closer as people. To be honest, Leo kind of plays kind of a bastard in this one, with complete disregard for others and their feelings. He challenges people's preconceptions and dichotomies. He is feral, impulsive, soulful, and wow, naked. Yeah, Leo is real naked in this one. Was not expecting that. But yeah, he calls out the flowery bourgeois poets and artists as fake rebels, and always is in search of the truest struggle where honest art apparently originates. He is terrible at times, but he's young and cocky, and it's this youthful arrogance mixed with honest talent that kind of makes it one of the most quintessential Leo performances to land on this entire ranking. Is it my favorite? No, not at all. Is it quite good? Yeah, mostly. Kinda. Is it a perfect movie to end a 30-film research project on? You bet your bottom dollar it is. This is such a good example of who Leo was in the 90s and the person he would become for the remainder of his career. I mean, it feels so analogous and predictive to his career, receiving the fame, the reputation, and then choosing what to do with it, which encompasses kind of the final act of the film. Perhaps I'm looking for a narrative where there is none. That's fair, but I see Leo clearly as the subject of the film, and in the metaphor, he represents his real-life career, but I feel like the audience, the greater movie-watching community, the culture surrounding him, that is represented by David Thewlis's character. I mean, he is obsessed with who Leo represents in us all, a talent, a youth, an individual who can rise above and create massively compelling art. And as per David Thewlis's character, it tears us apart. The relationship between DiCaprio and Thewlis is a rocky one, filled with twists and turns that keeps them away and has them coming right back. And isn't that the perfect metaphor for Leonardo DiCaprio's career? Sorry it comes so early in this episode. This feels like a mini outro in the first half of a long ranking. But no, I just wanted to make this point now. And this movie somehow represents that so well in my eyes. But back to the film itself a bit more. This is kind of a classic foray into French European cinema, and for this, the content is much more explicit and unstigmatized. But I mean, it truly feels authentic, them reveling in the ugliness of life and their complete lack of ambition to improve it. There's a real uniquity to the film and Leo's performance in it. Perhaps it is his most mature, I think, until maybe Departed. I don't know, I mean it. This isn't the best line delivery in his career. It's not my favorite intonation or physicality of Leo's career, but is probably perhaps one of his most mature roles ever. A great quote from him: "The only unbearable thing is that nothing is unbearable." If there's one line that kind of captures his character, it might be that one. I mean, it's deeply polarizing, mainly because DiCaprio and Thewlis engage in many explicit sexual trysts together throughout the film, and it is pretty striking to see scenes in a film like this. I mean, it's not often we're shown such a casual homosexual relationship in a period piece, only because it's usually buried under mountains of subtext. But it's bold and refreshing to see it so brashly displayed here, so bravo, Total Eclipse. Overall, Leo once again adds quite a bit of diversity and nuance to his oeuvre and proves simultaneously that he's really good at animal noises. It makes me wonder, damn, why doesn't he seek out roles that utilize his voice more? Or why don't directors utilize that skill as much for him? Because, I don't know, Leo's scene imitating a dog or the sheep in the pasture are quick, but like the sounds he's able to create with his voice are so interesting and impressive. And I just want to say it here and now, Leo is a great voice actor. He's not just a pretty face. I think that fact can sometimes be forgotten. And despite my praising of this film, it isn't the highest rated. I do have my issues with it. I don't think the character of Rambeau is fully fleshed out. And I don't think the dialogue is like spot on for the character all the time. But what I mentioned before as well, I do really like this. So it ends up ranking at number 14. Also, I should note an eerie fact about this film. Leo actually replaced River Phoenix in this movie, who died before filming began. And considering that many people consider Leo early on as like a River Phoenix-esque teen heartthrob, it's also an eerie watch when considering what may have been. In many ways, this film does sometimes feel like a passing of the torch a little bit. It's kind of weird in that sense. But moving on to later in his career, Leo, in his 30 years, has had 3 major collaborations with directors throughout his career. First, Martin Scorsese. He's done 5 films with Scorsese. Next, Quentin Tarantino and his 2 films in the 2010s, Django and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I love how different Leo's 2 characters are in many respects. I mean, he's not repeating a performance, and I wouldn't want him to. And third, and possibly most fascinating, Baz Luhrmann. Baz made some waves again this summer, coming out with his first movie in nearly 8 years, Elvis. But Baz's previous film before Elvis was one of the performances I remember Leo for most when I was a kid, The Great Gatsby. However, this is only the second of Leo's work with the Australian director, his first being the movie we're talking about right now, 1996's Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is a pretty good take on the classic Shakespearean play, in my opinion. It's in its original dialogue, and wow, I mean, like, legit props to Leo's elocution here and tackling the iambic pentameter of the play. This ranks pretty high on my list, and it may be just for the sole reason that Leo is able to convey the true emotions of the text to the audience, even when the style of theatrical speech is pretty outdated and can be easily lost on modern viewers. This has got to be one of Leo's most unique scripts of all his movies, and he gets this role so young and he kills it. I mean, the stylization of the set design and the cinematography and costumes also, I think, leads to Leo leaning into the crazed, sweaty environment of the film, and it informs his performance in a really cool way. I mean, particularly the scenes on the beach in Mantua, or dealing with the Capulet family. Also, oh my goodness, don't forget, like, baby Paul Rudd is in it. Yeah, baby Paul Rudd is speaking Shakespearean poetry like a champ, and he plays the character so well. And don't, remember when Paul Rudd got roles like this? Me neither, and I still miss them. But back to Leo, though. This is such a cool modern adaptation, and Leo is cast so well as a contrast of the traditional soft, romantic Romeo of most productions. Yes, he's a teen heartthrob, but he adds a madness and energy to the role that I think is often lost. So I feel like so many actors approach Shakespearean text like it's a prayer or it's some solemn historical text to be read like a lecture. And a lot of people don't bother to add such crazed emotion into Romeo like Leo does. And I think that's why it also stands out. This is probably one of the young Leo performances most people also know best in the 90s trilogy of, I would say, Gilbert Grape, this, and then Titanic. Those are like his big 3 recognizable roles. And man, thank goodness this one's up there because I love it. It's amazing. So yeah, easy inclusion in the top 10 here. Specifically, this one is ranked at number 7. More 90s Leo performances than I thought would be up here now that I'm looking at the top 10. But I mean, I gotta understand the hype was there for a reason. It's kind of fun to watch this little ranking fill in. But yeah, moving on to 1996's Malvin's Room. Plot. Bessie, played by Diane Keaton, and Lee, played by Meryl Streep, all sisters who have remained apart for nearly 20 years due to radically different personalities and life paths. Bessie remained in Florida to care for their ill, bedridden father, played by Hume Cronin, and Lee moved to Ohio to marry and have a family. But Bessie's doctor, played by Robert De Niro, he's back, has informed her that she has leukemia and needs a bone marrow transplant. Bessie's prognosis and Lee's troubled son, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, create an unexpected family reunion. To be honest, there's this overpowering kind of paint-by-the-numbers writing and production style that really makes me dissociate from the film, and it doesn't seem that the actors were given much in the way of depth with the characters. I mean, you have Diane Keaton, the doting daughter of her aging parents, Meryl Streep, her sister, and the problem child who abandoned the family and passed her issues onto her juvie-attending son, played by Leonardo DiCaprio. I will say the film creates this air of claustrophobia that is, like, amazingly palpable. Like, everyone feels so trapped in this family. There's this neurosis, and I think we're supposed to feel Diane Keaton is trapped in, that everyone deserves to escape if they were just a bit more giving. But sadly, the film is clearly trying to be a down-to-earth dramedy about dysfunctional lower-class American life, but it's just not compelling, really. It doesn't give us much in the way of character development or nuance. I mean, Meryl Streep and Leo often feel like caricatures of who they're playing. Like, there's a lot of points in the film where instead of creating an actual emotional climax in the film through performance, it seems the solution to an argument is people just repeating what they just said, but louder, like 3 or 4 times. Now, is that a script thing, a direction thing, an acting choice? Who's to say? But the end result is just, I guess it just rubs me the wrong way. And as for Leo, his over-defensive, antagonistic behavior, clearly in reaction to his terrible mom, doesn't really connect. I can't see a lot of depth in his performance, and that is kind of perhaps due to the fact he's picked a potentially shallower role. In many ways, Leo acts in many of his characters as an internal child, trying hard to be an external adult. A little bit of imposter syndrome, and a lot of bit of having something to prove around his elders. I mean, look at Catch Me If You Can, Great Gatsby, Quick and the Dead, Revolutionary Road, like, all in their own way, Leo is a child. And I think this kind of stems from him almost always playing younger than his actual age when he became a superstar, and it became a familiar trait, perhaps for us and for him. Here, perhaps he's flipped the script a bit, and there was a line of dialogue when Diane Keaton asks something about his stint in juvie, and she says, "You're not an adult," because he's like 17 years old, and he snaps back and says, "I am an adult." And it's one of the probably most telling lines of the film for his character, and it feels like he's almost grown up too fast. He is emotionally stunted from his distant mother, and that simple moment is kind of a cool insight to how he sees himself. But it's one thing to have grown up too fast and lose any sense of a secure and carefree childhood, but Leo's character, Hank, is smart and perceptive and has the wherewithal, the self-awareness to realize what he's lost, and he can't handle it. And there's something I can love about Leo's performance here in this movie, because I got all of that from one line of dialogue from him. But again, yeah, star-studded cast: Diane Keaton, Leo, Gwen Verdon, Margot Martindale, Meryl Streep, and Robert De Niro in their third collaboration since Deer Hunter and Falling in Love. Like, I love seeing Streep and De Niro together. But everyone involved is somehow, like, canceling each other out, sort of. I mean, they seem to be trying, but nothing is connecting. And, yeah, I don't want to wreck this movie. It has admirable traits, but I do rank it pretty low. I put it actually at number 25. Here's a fun fact. The character who plays the bedridden grandpa, Hume Cronin, a famous supporting actor with a giant filmography, actually helped write Alfred Hitchcock's Rope. How about that? That movie and Hitchcock's earlier film, Under Capricorn, are his only film writing credits, basically. And I don't know, that was the fun little fact I wanted to add. But yeah, Mulvan's Room, just not for me. This never really clicked for me with anyone on screen, particularly Leo. The Disney World sequence is fun, and I don't like Disney World, so I guess that's nice. It made me enjoy Disney World. Moving on. It's 1997. Let's start with the fact that Leo has just been offered a new movie, a little film called Boogie Nights from director Paul Thomas Anderson. But he has turned down a role in Boogie Nights to do his next film, 1997's Titanic. And wow, imagining Leo in Boogie Nights is pretty awesome. But what's even crazier to imagine is Leo not in Titanic, or even anyone else in the role of Jack Dawson in Titanic. But yeah, we have made it. The true first mega hit for Leo, 1997's James Cameron epic film Titanic. Let's give the Wikipedia spiel that this movie deserves. Incorporating both historical and fictionalized aspects, the film is based on the accounts of the sinking of the RMS Titanic in 1912 and stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet as members of different social classes who fall in love aboard the ship during its ill-fated maiden voyage. Also starring are Billy Zane, Kathy Bates, and Bill Paxton. The modern scenes of the research vessel were shot on board the academic Mstislav Keldysh, which Cameron had used as a base when filming the wreck. Scale models, computer-generated imagery, and a reconstruction of the Titanic built at Baja Studios were used to recreate the sinking. The film was co-financed by Paramount Pictures and 20th Century Fox. The former handled distribution in North America, while the latter released the film internationally. It was the most expensive film ever made at the time, with a production budget of $200 million. Nominated for 14 Academy Awards, it tied All About Eve in 1950 for most Oscar nominations and won 11 of them, including awards for Best Picture and Best Director, tying Ben-Hur, 1959, for the most Oscars won by a single film. With an initial worldwide gross of $1.84 billion, this is 90s money, $1.84 billion in the 90s. Titanic was the first film to reach the billion-dollar mark. It remained the highest-grossing film of all time until another James Cameron film, Avatar, surpassed it in 2010. A 3D version of Titanic, released on April 4th, 2012, to commemorate the centennial of the sinking, earned it an additional $343 million worldwide, pushing the film's worldwide total to $2.195 billion, making it the second film to gross more than $2 billion worldwide after Avatar. In 2017, the film was re-released for its 20th anniversary and was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Okay, what does all that mean? What was all that about? That was basically reminding everyone that Titanic was massive. The ship, the story, and the movie, all massive and unsinkable. But yeah, this film is easily, like, even to this day, it's still got to be like one of Leo's biggest movies, because it was just one of the biggest movies of all time, one of the highest grossing, one of the most beloved of Leo's performances. I mean, this is such a touchstone in his career, and it happened so early, and he is the leading man. Him and Kate Winslet, like, it is their movie. And he will always have this. He will always have one of the most, like, Hollywood successful movies of all time under his belt. And, you know, originally I was not going to have much to say about this film, but I knew it was the first of 3 films that very much needed a rewatch for me. The next 2 being Gangs of New York and then The Departed. Because I didn't really remember all of those super well, and I didn't want to just go on, like, half-baked memories. But this one was probably the one I like the least. I remember pretty viscerally despising this film for many years, and I really wanted to go back and remember, like, why. Why did I hate this movie? And yeah, the film's, it's got its issues. It's certainly not terrible. I think I had a lot more vitriolic hate for it when I was in high school. I think I just was like, I had seen Great Gatsby and I had seen Romeo and Juliet. And I'm like, really, guys? This is the Leo performance everyone talks about? But, like, yeah, it's certainly, it's a unique film experience. And I guess it's just not for me. All right? I am certainly not in the camp of lampooning any people who love this movie. Because, hey, enjoy what you want. And I did enjoy it a bit more on a rewatch this past month. But the things that do make me enjoy the film are often things that just make me laugh. And I feel bad saying that about a semi-historically accurate disaster movie, but let's get into it. I realized pretty early on that one of the things I kind of appreciate about the film that I had forgotten is that it is a film within a film structure that is legitimately unique in its execution. There was honest plot points and character development that goes on in the present day story that bookends the film, and the fact that it sticks around in the beginning as long as it does is enough to really make it feel like that's the main story, which is awesome. I like that the A plot of sorts, air quotes there, takes place on the research vessel in modern day, while the reminiscing really feels like reminiscing, except when we get scenes that Rose could not have known about, so they just add them in for the audience, which does kind of take me out of the nostalgia factor that sells me on the movie to begin with. But let's get into why we're here. Leonardo DiCaprio as Jack Dawson, the young nomadic Wisconsin native going back to his homeland by winning a card game and a third-class ticket on the unsinkable ship on her maiden voyage, the RMS Titanic, the jewel of the White Star Line boat company. Look no further than Leo's first line of dialogue in the film that really gets to the core of his initial character pretty well. When you got nothing to lose. Leo does have this youthful energy still, and it's like prime 90s Leo, but up until this point, this is the biggest film we get to see that in. And films of this scale, of this production value and financial backing, are the films that become the norm in Leo's career. And this is the beginning. This is the first one. And, you know, it is a 90s movie, so the graphics hold up kinda if you only watch it once. You look any closer and, oh boy, this thing looks pretty atrocious by today's standards, but there are still some really cool shots. Like when the bow of Titanic lifts up out of the water, and it's just this massive thing with all the little lifeboats. Amazing. And despite that, I can still see how big of a feat this film is for James Cameron, for CGI artists everywhere in the 90s, and for Leo. I like how this really feels like he's made a step up. Like, he can feel being in the biggest film of his career, and the whole King of the World line totally reflects that. Though, with that in mind, here's maybe my first big issue I have with the film. The movie doesn't really let the actors act sometimes, maybe a lot of times. Because, I mean, up to this point, I've been treated to some great acting performances from 3 leads from films pre-1997. Leo with Basketball Diaries, Gilbert Grape, Quick and the Dead, Kate Winslet with Peter Jackson's Heavenly Creatures, Sense and Sensibility, and Hamlet. Even Billy Zane at this point had films like Memphis Belle and Orlando. So, I mean, seeking these actors who've proven their talent and worth time and time again, and then giving them kind of mayonnaise roles that work sometimes more as archetypes than actual people, is certainly disheartening. It feels much more about the spectacle of James Cameron's Titanic than it does the characters. And in this specific situation, I don't really want this film to be so self-important. And I've seen Leo and Kate do better. I mean, you have these fantastic actors. Use them. Let them breathe. Especially in the first half of the film when there are scenes where the dialogue just feels so stale. And that could be a script thing. It probably is. But either way, they're not being given much to work with. The words often don't have any punch, weight, uniquity, whatever you want to call it. I think it improves in the second half a little bit, but I'm not sure if that's because it's the disaster half of the film. I don't know. And Billy Zane is like cartoonishly snooty and evil, like the real mustache twirling girl on the train tracks villain type, really hamming it up, and it's like legitimately fun and ridiculous and cringy in good ways. But he may fit the best into this whole film because there is a slight camp that the production value of the film can only mostly cover up. But it's still there a little bit. The Rambo First Blood Part 2 camp, the Abyss camp, even the Terminator camp to an extent. I mean, we're talking James Cameron, you know? Actually, fun fact, quick aside, I looked up James Cameron's writing credits for all the movies he's written and found this super funny thing. After 2009's Avatar, the next film that he's credited as writing or helping write was actually Robert Rodriguez's Alita Battle Angel. And when you look at the two posters together on Letterboxd, they're both the CGI half faces, but on matching sides. So it kind of just looks like one face, and I thought that was cute. And gosh, also, maybe James Cameron was the last guy to get away with using papyrus font on a movie's promotional material, not as a total joke. Wow, good job, James. But anyways, back to Titanic. The cinematic romance feels pretty manufactured. The conflict between Billy Zane and Kate Winslet feels kind of rigid. And heck, that one character who pressures the captain into going fast for the sake of publicity is like pulled right out of a certain 1970s disaster movie that came to mind. And then I had the pleasure of watching just last month. That's right, The Poseidon Adventure. And wow, did Titanic take some major inspiration from an arguably better film. But I mean, even the 60s novel of The Poseidon Adventure is just partially inspired by disasters like the actual Titanic sinking. So, I don't know, it's all just kind of like feeding back into itself. Though with that in mind, I mean, there's a lot of film production value that makes up for it. There are certain things that just make you realize the insane amount of research they did in recreating the Titanic and how it felt to be in 1912 on the ship, in the dining room, the cabins, everything. Like, that is a treat to see. And it probably is the most admirable aspect of the film. And I think despite just the fact of him being popular, I think this was a great casting having Leo, because I think he fits really well into period pieces in general. I'd argue it's something I've come to expect in any film he may be in. I mean, but think about this. After this, we still have 25 years of his career to go, and there are only 6 films left that aren't period pieces. I mean, that makes nearly 75% of all his movies being period pieces. Also, partway through, I had an idea that if we didn't get a modern segment, like if it wasn't going back to like the 1990s research vessel storyline and it was just the 1912 segment as the movie, I would have entitled this film Woes of the Idle Rich. But that's just me. Okay, final thoughts on Titanic. Leo is good, not great. I think it's a career moment I respect more than I enjoy. So, I mean, it gets me excited for what great heights he would go on to reach with future roles. Plus, Leo has some legitimately funny moments as Jack. I mean, being locked up in the room as the ship sinks and around the first class people, and just, I don't know, it's fun. Like when Kate Winslet is leaving and he's like, okay, I'll stay here, and he's still handcuffed. This poor man, he's gonna drown. And poor Kate Winslet is like, it's okay, Kate, just use the axe. Please don't hit my hand. That's a fun scene, okay? And yeah, I mean, the first class dinner scene that Jack gets invited to slaps. Love that one. He's great. And oh my goodness, imagine my excitement when I saw this. I'm rewatching Titanic. And he does that. It's the Gatsby thing he did. He did the Gatsby meme thing. So awesome. Overall, I rank Titanic at number 20. I thought it was going to be way lower, and I'm happy to report it went up little by little as this project progressed. So yeah, not terrible, not great. Next up, The Man in the Iron Mask, the 1998 film, and Leo's follow-up to Titanic. Now, I did watch this one pretty late in my binge session of all of Leo's films this summer, and at this point, I'd gone through a few films that just really put me in a bummer mood, and I was saving this one like a treat when I know I needed it to be invigorated by this episode again, only because the supporting cast behind Leo, namely John Malkovich, Jeremy Irons, and Hugh Laurie. So I was very excited to at least see all these actors together. The Man in the Iron Mask is a classic Three Musketeers tale. The former musketeer Athos, played by John Malkovich, swears vengeance after despotic King Louis XIV, played by Leo, causes the death of his son. Summoning his old comrades Porthos, Gerard Depardieu, and Aramis, Jeremy Irons, he hatches a plan to liberate the nation, but the Three Musketeers must also contend with their old friend D'Artagnan, Gabriel Byrne, who has remained in the king's service. And I should say right here, I have to do heavy spoilers for this movie. I try to stick to like medium spoilers, which is like, no reveals, no third act discussion. But here, I should really discuss it, because it's pertinent. So skip ahead a couple minutes if you don't want this pretty alright movie spoiled. Okay, here we go. Leo, in fact, plays two characters. He has a split role. He is despotic King Louis, the antagonist, and he is also the titular character, the Man in the Iron Mask. And what a role it is. Like the power-crazed ultimate celebrity, a young King Louis of France, and his secret twin brother hidden away so as to never challenge the throne or cause any feuding that would tear a kingdom apart. Revolutionary leader Jeremy Irons breaks him out and plans to switch the two to bring peace back to the country. And I won't say what happens, but that's like the big reveal, is that you're kind of wondering, who's this man in the Iron Mask? And then they take the mask off. You're like, what? It's Leo, but he's the king. It's fun. I like it. I think this is like during a point in Leo's career that he is really starting to pick roles, not accept them. And perhaps, the opportunity to play a dual role excited him to expand kind of his acting prowess. I wouldn't be surprised because he makes some really interesting choices with both characters, I think. It's interesting because if this movie was made maybe like 5-10 years down the road and Leo's more of an adult, I think he would have made a really intriguing D'Artagnan. Because D'Artagnan is easily the most complex and interesting of the four. If we're talking the Three Musketeers, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis, and D'Artagnan, the captain of the guard. Athos, the hothead. I've seen Leo play that. Look at Marvin's Room or Revolutionary Road. Porthos, the sexed-up comedic relief. It doesn't really fit Leo, unless under like Wolf of Wall Street context, perhaps. And Aramis, confident, intelligent, thoughtful, and faithful revolutionary. I've seen Leo play that. But D'Artagnan, I think that could be really interesting. I mean, he's such a complex character, torn between the duty of love, friendship, country, and king, but he's much too young. I mean, here, Leo is meant to be 22, but as of 1998, Leo is actually, in real life, 26. He's been acting under his age most of his career. He has yet to reach that just look where he can kind of mature out of, like, playing younger characters, but he does play younger characters in a really compelling way. But yeah, post-Titanic, it's the first time I think Leo is showing even slight signs of looking to grow up and become an acting independent, I guess, choosing the roles he wants to express and add specifically to his career, his oeuvre. Plus, working with directors he wants, because from here on out, no joke, it's almost only high-profile, known directors. But overall, not a bad performance from Leo. Nothing that blows me out of the water, but cool, fun, unique, and shows him just a little more of his range. I would recommend it, and I actually rank it at number 15. Now, to return to what I said earlier, what I teased earlier as Basketball Diaries' sister film in spirit, Celebrity. Another New York City drama, but a very different neighborhood of New York filmmaking. This is Woody Allen's 1998 film. Much how Leo's character in Basketball Diaries despises the Westchester preppies who have the money for rehab when the drugs get to be too much, it seems Leo's character here is that exact thing. Leo's character is a rousing take on the coked-up, larger-than-life prima donna young actor. He has money and power to get anything he wants, and he has looks, and he still has his youth, and he plays this overload so well. He's become a psychopath, essentially. The film circles mostly around Kenneth Branagh, who's like this writer, reporter, kind of going around picking story to story. And it's the latest edition in Woody Allen's self-deprecating protagonist as a comedy theme that he's done like since Annie Hall and before. But like here he gets Kenneth Branagh's character kind of gets like an invitation to be able to do a little interview with this huge star played by Leo, who at that point is a huge star. It's like an amazing casting. And it's just this explosive like 10 to 15 minute performance. Like the film is very segmented, going from like character to character, so we only get like 2 or 3 scenes with Leo. Kenneth Branagh tries to follow him around, and he's just kind of chasing him down, and he finally is able to kind of get him down for a minute, and then it just turns into very similar to the scene we saw before when he invites Kenneth Branagh to like hook up with these women with him, and Leo is now the one who's all gung-ho, and Kenneth Branagh is just kind of there like, yeah, so how's your night going? So, I mean, what's so cool about Leo is the self-awareness he kind of brings to the role, despite how nuanced it is. He has all these things, and he knows that. He's smart, but he doesn't know what the hell to do with it. So it's like we're watching him short-circuit, fully engage in his vices, and it's like an imminent meltdown in front of our eyes. It's really cool. A sneaky, small performance that honestly ranks pretty high on the list at number 10. He's only 2 or 3 consecutive scenes in this film, but he makes an impression when he's there, like for sure. And despite the length, it is indeed it cracks the top 10 for performances, in my opinion. It's really interesting. But I'm not a huge fan of the movie, or Woody Allen in general, so moving on. Okay, everybody, we have entered the 21st century. Welcome. Y2K didn't end the world, and thank goodness, because we have 20 more years of DiCaprio to talk about. And we start with a pretty pivotal example of the unique genre of filmmaking. The gritty, shaky, electro-punk cinema of the 2000s. Now, this is something I've discussed just like a little bit before on the show, here and there, but there's this style of editing, credit design, and particularly the score to these types of films that really timestamps them too. I mean, from the get-go in The Beach, it was a pulsing late 90s, early aughts electro score. And to be honest, it hasn't aged great. But here overall, I mean, this is a weird addition in Leo's filmography, and I am here for it. Let's backtrack a bit. 1997, Titanic is released and becomes the highest grossing, most nominated box office smash hit in the history of cinema. And who is the male lead? Leonardo DiCaprio. And his presence to even the most casual movie lover is undeniable. He's youthful and electric on the screen. And what is his big follow-up to Titanic? Man in the Iron Mask. And then Woody Allen's Celebrity. 2 movies I can safely say most of you probably hadn't heard of before me mentioning them a few minutes ago. And I didn't know about them. I mean, this only happens because I really went in deep to his filmography. So The Beach rests in between Titanic and kind of the next phase of his career, starting with Gangs of New York and Catch Me If You Can. And these couple years in between Titanic and Gangs of New York is like a really bizarre little empty space. Because again, Titanic is his breakout role, and Gangs of New York is the beginning of his A-list celebrity career post-Titanic. And it's his first Scorsese collab. But there are 4 films in this era. 4. And it's not an immediate transition. We get 4 relatively unknown releases from Leo before any movie he's in is a big deal again. And this is the 3rd of those. Man in the Iron Mask, Celebrity, The Beach, and a 4th hidden gem we'll get to after this. But I find that very interesting, that we're kind of in the very end of Leo being able to be in a movie without people really hearing about it. This is a special, like, final run of his. And I like talking about these because we do have some really interesting performances. So here's the plot. Leo's character, Richard, is a young traveler visiting Thailand for some time when he encounters a man who tells him about a mythical beach that is perfect in every way, and he goes searching for it with the 2 other backpacking 20-somethings from France that he runs into. The film itself is pretty tonally expansive. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy portions to the film. It's meaningful, existential, edgy, modern, it's action, dramatic, it's a comedy. It's hard to pin down any one singular tone from scene to scene. It's much less cut and dry, like in films such as Man in the Iron Mask or Celebrity, that very much kind of have like just like one tone throughout the whole movie. And it feels like not just in this setting, but this is like Leo's foreign movie, in the sense that this is a performance from an actor that feels more removed from any of the film groups he's been in before. I mean, this is far removed from the type of movie we've seen, which, to be honest, it's been a lot of small-town American dramas or well-to-do period pieces, which encompass nearly 6 or 7 of, like, the last 12 movies we've discussed. Leo's paired up with a new camp of European actors that really just singles out Leo as the only quote-unquote known person, potentially in more Hollywood circles. Just as he feels like a bit of a loner, outsider, independent in the film itself, his envisioned status compared to the other actors greatly separates him, adding to like this further feeling of inner isolation. And I think this is what drives Richard as a character to fit in and go with the group as often as he can, but in many times he can't deny his yearnings and his drives as he is as a person, as an individual. So Leo being in such a place of non-power is kind of unique for him, and I really respect this role. And as far as his actual performance goes, it's fine. It's a little over the top at times, in the beginning at least, when he's supposed to play excited or angry. He's kind of overdoing it. But I think what draws me to this role, what connects with me, is the amount of uniquity in the performance too. Richard is a character very devoid of direction, and his constant narration really gives us no room for interpretation. I mean, he's looking for an adventure and willing to follow whatever gives him more than he has to give to others. Therein lies the flaws of his character, and his vacation experiences begin to sour as the film progresses, especially being subject to the whims of those he is around. I'm really not trying to spoil this thing, but I will admit a lot of the film is not actually about the search for the beach. I'll say that. He is young, impulsive, and looking for thrills, and this manifests in many ways. Freedom, ego, adrenaline, testosterone, boyish desire. I mean, what's funny is that some of Leo's best moments in the film are easily the ones when he is acting alone, when he's not around others, and the film just starts with him alone. And we get scenes here and there throughout where Leo is left to his own devices, and this is really intriguing. And yet that's what makes the performance inconsistent. You know, we don't always get that. I mean, some highlights for me are easily in the latter part of the second act before the climax, and the opening scenes before they reach the first island that supposedly houses this beach. So totally an intriguing watch. And for the uniquity alone, this makes it a bit higher on the list that even I expected it to, because there's some absolutely bonkers choices from Leo that no other film in his filmography challenges him to do, and I love it. If I can give any semi-spoilery final impressions, this movie feels like a prequel to Apocalypse Now, in a really weird way. It doesn't feel like it, but it also kind of feels like it. The South Asian setting helps, but yeah, as The movie progresses, and Richard evolves as a character and gains experiences. It feels like he's beginning to channel Colonel Kurtz, Marlon Brando's character from Apocalypse Now, and in his warped understanding, reality becomes almost like a game or a battle to be won, and it's just so fascinating being able to make that comparison. And towards the end, it gets more of a Deer Hunter vibe, so it's a whole gumbo of Southeast Asian narratives with Caucasian intervention. So yeah, interesting stuff. I actually rank it at number 12. Probably the weirdest one that makes it into this second row here, minus maybe celebrity. But best quote, "Nothing is allowed to interrupt the pursuit of pleasure, not even dying." That line of narration really sums up the film super well and speaks to Richard's character development. Oh, yeah, and this scene happens. Next up is maybe the most infamous film in Leo's career, and for an interesting reason, since Leo and his co-star Tobey Maguire, for which this film would be the second of 3 on-screen collaborations, both insisted they agreed to shoot a short film, and yet it was re-edited and released as a full-length feature film, perhaps in an attempt to market it as a new full-length feature film starring a soon-to-be Spider-Man and Titanic's Jack Dawson. So here is the documentation of this film's contentious history, and there's a fantastic Vanity Fair article on this film as well. I'll link that below. Seriously, check out the Vanity Fair article. It's a compelling read. But, of course, we are talking about 2001's Don's Plum. The film was actually shot over 6 days in the summer of 1995, roughly placing the film probably before or after Basketball Diaries. But the film's release as a lost film of Leo's wasn't until 2001, since it was wrapped up in so much legal issues and an abysmal post-production process. DiCaprio and Maguire were opposed to having the film released, and according to them, the film was pitched to them as a short film but was later re-edited into a feature-length film. And producer David Stutman alleges that Maguire opposed the film's release due to his improvised performance revealing too much about him. Stutman filed a lawsuit in 1998 against DiCaprio and Maguire. They settled on allowing the film to be released outside the US and Canada and had some scenes removed. And this is one of the few films, due to its contentious history, that actually has the actors' rates as public knowledge. DiCaprio and Maguire were each paid $575 a day to appear in the film. In 2014, film producer Dale Wheatley published an open letter to DiCaprio on the website freedonsplum.com, giving his take on the history of the film and the ensuing legal issues. Wheatley also updated the film to the website so that it could be streamed for free. It was removed in January 2016 after a third-party notification by DiCaprio and Maguire claiming infringement, but Wheatley made the following statement to Fox News. "It saddens me deeply that in 2016 we witnessed the senseless oppression of film and art by one of America's most beloved actors. While the world celebrates, and certainly Americans celebrate, his great achievements in cinema, he chooses to use an iron fist to suppress the work of many other artists, including him, in a film made 20 years ago. Today, the film can be watched on YouTube, and that is how I watched it, on YouTube. I place it so late on young Leo's filmography because it premiered February 10th, 2001 in Berlin. Time Out New York writer Mike D'Angelo called it the best film I saw in Berlin, and Variety magazine called it an unpleasant and tedious ensemble. So who's to say who's right in this case? I mean, I would really suggest watching the 2019 miniseries to find out, The Curse of Don's Plum. And I have these two very diverse reactions to the film. And at the end of this little analysis, I will say whether I agree with Mike D'Angelo or Variety more. We'll get to that. Sadly, I didn't have time to watch the 2019 miniseries because I was kind of busy watching 30 movies for this episode, but trust me, where it seems like a pretty interesting case of what happened. I think from the clips I was able to glean, it's a very interesting story behind this movie. But yeah, man, nothing was going to prepare me for what I was going to be in for, because this movie is bizarre. Easily the weirdest film Leo has had his name attached to. And when we talk about the stereotypical black and white, independent, low-budget indie film, when people joke about films like that, this is the film. This is the kind of film they mean. Because at least a film like Celebrity has production value, and Woody Allen is a compelling visual storyteller. I'll say that. But this thing, from the first scene in the overly sexy jazz club, everything feels off. Performances are weird and disjointed. The editing choices are insane. What's the story? What is the story? Here is the entire plot description that I could find. Don's Plum is centered around a friend group of young 20-year-olds who meet at a restaurant called Don's Plum every Saturday night. The 4 male friends usually bring a girl with them to all hang out. Drama ensues, including verbal and physical altercations between the friends and their other members in the restaurant. There is very little concrete plot, with more of a friends hanging out movie. That is the description I could find. And this is Wikipedia. It says more of a friends hanging out movie. That sounds like a 9th grader review of this film. We get to the actual restaurant, Don's Plum, about 20 minutes into the film. And it's kind of like the second portion of the film after the initial jazz club portion. And it's just as weird right at the top. 2 characters loudly playing harmonica and crooning over it in the middle of the restaurant. And again, maybe it's the improvisation, but the script is so weird. It's so weird and disjointed and nonsensical. Like, it seems pretty obvious to me, and this is my take, that these actors were introduced to this film as something that was deeply improvisational, and they could really create their characters as they wanted and develop them, evolve them within a scene. But I gotta just say, it feels like improvisation, and none of these actors' strengths are as improvisers. And Leo's character, Derek, is legitimately a unique character for him, as unique as the film itself. I mean, he is kind of a douchey bro. He doesn't have much charm or finesse. He's just a rude fella, and that's a unique character for him, because it's very human. You know, he's not elevating the character above anything except the very ground level, realist tone of the film. Realist in the sense that the characters are just regular people. I don't mean realist in its presentation, because the presentation is very much surreal with like how off kilter everything feels. And I'll say it doesn't feel like intentional. It's just coming from a lack of cohesion and direction. But yeah, Derek is a filthy, X-rated, white, privileged young male chauvinist. Other films would add a certain je ne sais quoi, but not here. And he plays it well. I mean, he is brutal. I don't think I've seen him this terrible. Like, I'm not kidding. This is like Calvin Candy from Django Unchained levels of awfulness. And honestly, him pulling this deep into this character and still being so early in his career is fascinating. Because as much as I say it's a 2001 film, it was made in 95. This is like a time capsule of a movie. And he actually, a great quote from Vanity Fair, actually. From the Vanity Fair article, at least, according to Wheatley, DiCaprio was never under any illusions about his character Derek. Leo was like, wow, so I'm playing an asshole, Wheatley recalls. We were like, yes, you're going to be an asshole, but you're an asshole for a reason, a guy who struggles with his relationships with women over his tragic past. He turned and kind of with a wry grin said, I'm going to play myself, but an asshole times 10. Delivering his performance with an intensity that establishes a whole new movie's sharp-elbowed tone, DiCaprio filmed his part in a single night, then boarded a plane for New York to appear in the domestic drama Marvin's Room, opposite Meryl Streep and Diane Keaton. Before he left, Wheatley says DiCaprio orally pledged his commitment to Don's Plum, negotiating a share of its future profits, points, and signed a 2-sentence agreement to appear in the movie. The contract's lack of specificity would later become a major sticking point between the actor and the filmmakers. The agreement that we signed didn't specify a feature film, and it also didn't specify a short film, according to Wheatley. When you look at the film and understand that many of the producers, creators, actors of the film were all kind of in an NYC friend group, and this was in many ways a film representing but fictionally exaggerating the members of this friend group, and things just got really deteriorated in post-production. I mean, that kind of bleeds into the film very much. As the film goes along, I begin to appreciate the independent nature a little bit, but I can't help but think that the story behind the film is deeply more interesting than the film itself. Because at the end of the day, the film's just average at best. Like, at best. And it's certainly not for me. And it's got some real 90s indie filmisms that do very much get on my nerves. And, I can understand why this may feel like a splotch on his record. Because even when Leo was looking bad in other movies, he's looking good. But maybe this film was a bit too real and showed an ugly side that perhaps people maybe didn't want shown. To my earlier point, I think I stand with Variety, the Variety article, a bit more than D'Angelo. It's certainly not that great of a film, but it has its own weird, mean charm. I would recommend watching it, honestly, just for the story of its creation and for the fact that the film has been viscerally censored by the parties involved. It's free on YouTube, and if you email freedonsplum@gmail.com, you can get a link, I believe. I think if the service is still active, I'm not sure, but yeah, if you're really interested in a higher res version, email freedonsplum@gmail.com, and I think they'll get you a copy, a link or something. But yeah, if Leo's filmography is a video game, this is The Secret Level, a hidden performance of a young, talented Leonardo DiCaprio on the rise. And it's worth it even for that, despite the film's disjointed nature. So I rank it at number 17. And I get to this movie, and it does feel like many people take issue with it, particularly Leo, because it feels most real to who Leo was as a person, dealing with his fame and just dealing with being in Hollywood, being in that environment. This feels like it's pulled from his real life. And perhaps this is a film that more reveals who Leo was as a person back then. And I think Leo did a good amount of maturing and realized that he didn't want this kind of damaging view of who he was back then shown. And I guess I don't blame him. I guess I do. I still appreciate the film for its honesty, because Leo was dealing with a lot of press, with a lot of attention, and that very much changed who he was. And well, at the same time, he's dealing with a lot of talent that he has and a lot of power. I mean, just look at Celebrity. This is like in that same vein, except this is like gritty. It's real. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is just an interesting installment. And as much as I didn't love it, I'm happy it's here because I love the variety. And it's kind of interesting. This is actually, for me, the end of part 1. And I say part 1 in the sense that this is part 1 of a 3-part sort of structure I've put onto this episode. Because there are many places to cut off Leo's career, in my opinion. You could consider Titanic as like the end of his meteoric rise, and that is true. But I would never look at his I didn't want to look at his popularity or how that changes to delineate the 3 chapters I've laid out. But rather, look at how Leo himself changes in the eyes of me, the audience member. And going into 2002, this for me is the beginning of his maturing into an adult actor. He can only remain the babyface teen heartthrob for so long. And with these next movies, I truly feel like he makes the 3-step transformation into adult acting, and it's quite a thing to see. So here we go, everybody. Part 2. Starting off with a trilogy of films that I feel all begin to mature Leo out of his 90s teen heartthrob Titanic years. And I choose this as the beginning of part 2 because not only is it the beginning of a new chapter for Leo with the caliber of films and directors he works with, but it is the first film with Martin Scorsese, a man he will go on to create 5, soon to be 6 films with. But at the front of all these is 2002's Gangs of New York. Plot: Amsterdam Valen, played by Leo, is a young Irish immigrant released from prison. He returns to the 5 Points seeking revenge against his father's killer, William Cutting, played by Daniel Day-Lewis, a powerful anti-immigrant gang leader. He knows that revenge can only be attained by infiltrating Cutting's inner circle. Amsterdam's journey becomes a fight for personal survival, and he tries to find a place for the Irish people in 1860s New York. I don't have too much to say on this one, actually. It's a bizarre film, and Leo's performance tends to be the weaker of many of his castmates, particularly Liam Neeson, Daniel Day-Lewis, and Brendan Gleeson. His accent tends to falter in and out from scene to scene. It's not in his range of accents I think he can really just nail. Like in films like Blood Diamond or The Aviator or Django, like those are great, but 19th century Irish just doesn't really mesh well with his particular tone and delivery as an actor. So it's not great having that. Plus, I think a lot of the film's magic comes from the production design, not as much the probably period accurate but muddled and complex dialogue that may lose a viewer or two's interest. He often is mostly there in some scenes just to react to stuff or look at stuff, to like listen to what other people are saying, or like biding his time, or even towards the end of the film being a shadow. So just is not much, at least for me, that draws me to this performance from Leo. But I do respect that he's able to find the first film of Titanic level notoriety with a big name director and $100 million budget. And this is another narrative, like the next two films you see, where he literally grows up and matures through the film in obvious ways. That is the theme, and I love seeing that. Leo is picking roles, I think, where in the eyes of himself, the film, and the audience, he's becoming a serious adult. Do I love it? Not so much. I rank it at number 21, right below Titanic. But next up, the next big mainstream blockbuster family-friendly hit Leo has after Titanic, I would argue, 2002's Steven Spielberg film, Catch Me If You Can. The story of Frank Abagnale, one of the most prolific con men in American history, cashing nearly $4 million worth of fraudulent traveler's checks, all before his 19th birthday. Set in the backdrop of 1960s New York, Leo plays the main character with his father, Christopher Walken, and the man trying to catch him, if he can, FBI investigator Carl Hanratty, played by Tom Hanks, who at this point I think is kind of giving the final performance at the end of like the decade-long peak of Tom Hanks's career, starting around like 1993 Sleepless in Seattle, Philadelphia, Forrest Gump, that area, and which all come out within a year and a half of each other. This is also the second of the initial Tom Hanks Spielberg trilogy, starting with Saving Private Ryan in 98 and ending with Terminal in 04. And that's not to say Tom Hanks doesn't come back to work with Spielberg, but I would argue films like Bridge of Spies and The Post are in a very different era of Spielberg's career than these first three. So how does Leo fit into a pretty pre-established collaboration with the director and his cast? Pretty all right. Now, I think this film starts as trying to be a bit of a leftover from the youthful 90s DiCaprio days, in a sense, but at the same time, I truly feel that this is such a strategic role for Leo, because he does grow up in the film, air quotes, and we're left feeling that despite Frank Abagnale's actual age, he certainly ages beyond that in the film, like no other character Leo has played so far. Because next, he pushes that even further. But yeah, not much to say on this personally. I mean, it's a classic, fun, that makes sense role for Leo. You know, I think it's an average performance. I think his performance to me sometimes feels a bit too squeaky clean, a bit too clever. And yes, I understand that's literally what the film is. He is a fraud man who cleverly fakes his appearance and status. But still, the young portions of Leo supposing to be like 14 or 15 in the beginning isn't fantastic. And Christopher Walken honestly outshines him in most scenes, but I think once he goes solo and is allowed to just be not a literal teenager in the script, things really smooth out. I mean, there's also a scene where Leo discovers his mom potentially cheating on his dad with another member of the Rotary Club. This is like 20 minutes into the movie, and he says to Frank, he's starting to look more and more like his father every day. And I start to think about that. And honestly, Christopher Walken and Leo kind of work as like a really good casting as father and son. And just with the looks and having that emotional connection, despite me not really liking Leo trying to play so young in the first bit, I think they're a really good father-son duo. And I'm like just sitting here right now. I'm just thinking like, are there any better roles where Leo has a dad in the movie that I like more than this? Because we never meet his parents in Titanic. His dad's not around in Gilbert Grape or This Boy's Life or Basketball Diaries or also we don't meet anyone in Celebrity. We don't meet his parents in The Beach or Departed, or his dad's dead in Gangs of New York. Oh my god, wait. I think his dad... Sorry, this is like... I'm just like going off on a little like mind tangent. I think his dad is dead. I think Leo plays characters with moms and dead dads like often. That's a total trend. Man, I scripted this whole thing and I know there's always stuff I'm gonna miss. But that's a huge one. I should have picked up on that because he does kind of, in so many movies, have like a mama's boy sort of an aesthetic. I mean, I think that just pulls from his, not his real life, but he does have a really close relationship with his mom. And I don't know, that's something. Is this like the only movie where like Leo has a dad? Wait, I know I'm supposed to be, I'm going to get back to it, but like, I'm just going through my head, like Conception, he doesn't have a dad, J. Edgar, I don't think we meet his dad, Wolf of Wall Street, he has a dad in Wolf of Wall Street, there we go, so there's another one coming, okay, yeah, we'll see his dad in Wolf of Wall Street, his dad's awesome, so he's got two great dads. I might be missing another. I can't think of all 30 in my head right now, but anyways, because he has a stepdad, even in Critters 3. Like, he has no dads. God, sorry. Okay. Where was I? Yes. Catch me if you can. Some highlights from the film, specifically with Leo. The Pan Am portion of the film is probably the most iconic, I would say, and the most fun. I enjoy it, but it's more the editing and direction rather than the performances. But the story is so fun, and the dichotomy of the air quotes antagonist living a life of luxury, Leo, while the air quotes good guy, Tom Hanks, gets embarrassed and pulled through the dirt of the FBI trying to chase him. But that is a narrative device we're going to see again real soon. Overall, I like the movie more for the story and the editing and the directing and the pacing and other performances, and not so much Leo's. So despite this being a much better film than some above it on the ranking, it does end up a bit lower at number 19. So, moving on to 2004's The Aviator, the biopic of eccentric film producer and aviation engineer Howard Hughes. Now, if Christian Bale got his maturing role with American Psycho, with Pauline thanks to Leo rejecting it, then Leo sees his most maturing role, I think, with The Aviator, where we get a performance of Leo's that we've never seen before. Now, this is him really trying to break out of that boyish, fancy-free aesthetic. He started to get stuck in, honestly, and with the help of this, his second Scorsese film, he is given that chance. Just like in Gangs of New York and Catch Me If You Can, to now be an adult actor. I mean, he is an adult here. We see it in his physicality, his voice, his expression, his tone, everything. And yeah, it's certainly not a highlight for me personally in his career, but I appreciate, much like Titanic, the place it holds in his career for helping him evolve and expand as an actor. The first thing that hits me is the voice. He holds the higher pitch, southern draw of Howard Hughes for the entirety of the film. And also, this is a character with an acute case of obsessive-compulsive disorder, germophobia, and as some say, a passion for secrecy that became a mania. With all this brewing, a complicated and iconic figure of 20th century history is a big role that Leo fits pretty snugly into, and I think the physical and mental decline of Howard Hughes is portrayed in a pretty brash and uncensored way by DiCaprio and Scorsese, which I can admire. It's not a performance I particularly enjoy to a great extent, but it's a very interesting one that shows Leo doing a lot of weird, uncomfortable things and doing them convincingly. I mean, gosh, that home theater incident scene comes to mind. Ooh, that's a crazy one. And I appreciate the chances he's taking to veer into discovering more inclusive and ambiguous characters, people that live in gray areas of morality and understanding, and that's cool. So overall, I rank it at number 18. The ranking, it's been improving over these couple of movies. It's going up, and the trend will continue, not to spoil it. So I think we can all say at this point, young Leonardo has grown up, and he is fully an adult working actor, and despite still being that guy from Titanic, he has 3 big budget films from known directors that have helped to give him a more nuanced and complex reputation to the film-going world. And moving on from this is our next movie, the third collab with Scorsese. Yes, we are on to 2006's The Departed.
You know me?
No.
Well, I'm the guy that tells you there are guys you can hit, and there's guys you can't. Now, that's not quite a guy you can't hit, but it's almost a guy you can't hit. So I'm gonna make a fucking ruling on this right now. You don't fucking hit him. You understand?
Yeah, excellent. Fine.
What are you drinking?
Cranberry juice.
Boston. Anyways, the first of what I would say is Leo's action movie run, spanning from roughly Departed to Inception in 2010, and encompassing the 5 films of his that are, above anything, action films. Those being Departed, Blood Diamond, Body of Lies, Shutter Island, and Inception. Not to say he doesn't do other films within that span of time, or that these 5 films have other genres within them, but this is the trend for the late 2000s. It does feel like Hollywood trying to turn Leonardo DiCaprio into an action movie star. But back to The Departed. South Boston cop Billy Costigan, Leonardo DiCaprio, goes undercover to infiltrate the organization of gangland chief Frank Costello, played by Jack Nicholson. As Billy gains the mobster's trust, a career criminal named Colin Sullivan, played by Matt Damon, infiltrates the police department and reports on his activities to his syndicate bosses. When both organizations learn that they have a mole in their midst, Billy and Colin must figure out who each other's identities are to save their own lives. Wow. Good movie. I love this movie. Like, the plot is so good. Great movie. It's a great movie. Anyways, Leo starts the film as a young buzz-cut recruit to the Boston Police Department, and it feels like another one of those first films that Leo has that serious, transformative, mature tone to it. Not serious in film content, serious in Leo's delivery of dialogue, and in the way he carries himself too. One thing I actually noticed here is this is truly the beginning of Leo's goatee phase. You ever notice that? Leo loves rocking the goatee, and I think he wears it pretty well, honestly. And man, it matures him so easily, just having that goatee. And hey, consider the fact that this is the first movie of the goatee era of Leo's career, starting with Departed and encompassing Blood Diamond, Body of Lies, Shutter Island, Inception, and Django. And once the goatee has done its job kind of permanently growing Leo up in the minds of the audience, we get films like Gatsby and Wolf of Wall Street, where we get Leo becoming characters that are striving for eternal youth. And bam, the goatee's gone. And then he returns for the biggest goatee yet, The Revenant. But enough about facial hair. I truly love The Departed. It plays with this really cool, unique spin on the clean cop, dirty cop narrative. The situations that are so designed for an antagonist, dirty street fights, money laundering, and murder, all are weathered by the good guy, Leonardo. Meanwhile, the real enemy is living in a world of fancy dinners, courting pretty girls in elevators, and constant promotions, Matt Damon. The duality of Leonardo DiCaprio and Matt Damon's characters is so well put together, being two sides of the same coin. I mean, how natural it is the one trying to do good faces the hardest struggle in every facet of life, and how the bad have it so easy right up until it all falls apart. The best scene, and it is most of the scenes, are when Scorsese contrasts DiCaprio's and Damon's characters, especially with the complex mini-climax of DiCaprio's and Martin Sheen's meeting, which is kind of like his connect, the one guy who knows who Leo is in the department, and they're meeting at 344 Washington Street. And then the silent phone call, oh my god, I mean, come on. It's all pretty just like perfectly edited, acted, directed, written, almost everything in this scene. I mean, it's complex yet followable, impactful and exhilarating and transformative all at once. It's probably one of my favorite Scorsese scenes of any of his movies, to be honest. Scorsese's just having fun with it, and he's firing on all cylinders. I mean, the cast is so insanely stacked with supporting characters. Martin Sheen, Adam Baldwin, Vera Farmiga, Jack Nicholson in his last, like, powerful role. And Mark Wahlberg in the beginning as well. We got Marky Mark. We got our Basketball Diaries friend. He's back. I mean, it's really engaging. You know, I remember watching this for the first time. It was like February 2021, I think it was. And I actually did a double feature of Shutter Island, which is coming up, and then Departed. And I remember that in this completely stacked cast film about the Irish Boston mob, Leo was just kind of like an average performance. But I think on a rewatch for this project, he's improved. I mean, the struggle his character goes through is pretty darn palpable. And I think despite some kind of standard Leo-isms we see at this more action film portion of his career compared to his earlier dramatic portion of the 90s and early aughts, it mostly goes over well. Like, the physicality of this role is riveting. The action, the stunt work, the fight scenes is what draws me to Leo here. But, like, his dialogue, his accent, his delivery, it feels in many ways like run-of-the-mill Leo speaking with conviction because he just has the elocution and face to make you believe what he's saying. Maybe I've seen too many of his movies. I don't think so, but I love watching him act. But I don't know. I guess this film never really just comes across as adding anything to his career other than being a big name and a powerful face in a movie known for being jam-packed with big names and powerful faces. And that's not to say it's a bad performance at all, but damn, it's just not expanding the Leo oeuvre as much as I think other films do. I mean, it's all stuff we've seen before. And this is also not to lessen the entertainment value of this film and his performance. But what I've said does kind of land this role kind of just in the middle of this ranking. Leo has some pretty good monologues, like the therapy monologues with Vera Farmiga are great. But overall, I love the movie. It's one of my favorite movies on this list. Maybe like top 3 or top 5, but not really for Leo. I rank his performance here at number 16. Pretty good, but we will see better. And next up, okay, here we go. A film within Leo's 2000s run I bet most of you won't know. I certainly did not know about it when I was looking up all his movies. 2006's Blood Diamond. As civil war rages through 1990's Sierra Leone, two men, a white South African mercenary, Leo, and a black Mende fisherman, Jimon Honsu, I think that's how you say his name, become joined in a common quest to recover a rare gem that has the power to transform their lives. But with the help of an American journalist, Jennifer Connelly, the men embark on a hazardous trek through rebel territory to achieve their goal. Now, Leo post-Titanic gravitates often to roles that are kind of larger than life sometimes. And the scales of Leo's films improve, yes, that is a factor. But there's a lack of ground-level, everyday personness to Leo's performances once we pass the Titanic threshold. But this is not that. And surprisingly enough, this is one of my favorite Leo performances in this entire ranking. Was not expecting this film to be so well done and engaging, nor did I expect Leo to play such a unique and exciting character in his career. This feels like in many ways like his Han Solo role a bit. A sarcastic and cautious loner who benefits on both sides of crime and law to make himself a buck. He has connections everywhere, can always get out of a fix, and always has someone chasing him. And, you know, Leo, he plays this whole Han Solo aesthetic down a bit, so it matches better with kind of the down-to-earth and personal narrative, and it's pretty awesome. Plus, my God, the South African accent he's able to keep in the entire film is also like massively impressive. I start to forget what his regular voice sounds like. And I also get the sense the environmental themes of the film with blood diamonds, deforestation, resource mining, and war-torn nations is a cause he is passionate about in his regular non-actor life. And this feels much more like a response to his passion than a film like, say, Revenant might be. But everything about this performance is pretty gripping, to his dialogue, his demeanor. It's a great example of Leo's physicality and his capability to be an action movie star, which is an era we are now pretty deep into, and his arc as a character as well. There's a tangible character growth between him and Jennifer Connelly and Jimon Hansu's character, and yeah, I just can't recommend this one enough. It easily cracks the top 10 and actually rests comfortably at number 6. Probably the highest ranking, not to spoil, but probably the highest ranking in part 2 here of his career. Fun fact, he actually received an Oscar nomination for this. One of 5 Oscar nominations this film got, which absolutely blows me away. Now, he has had 6 nominations in his career, all pretty well spread out. There's his one supporting role in the 90s with Gilbert Grape. He's got 2 in the 2000s for Aviator and Blood Diamond, not Departed, which surprised me, and then 3 in the 2010s with Wolf of Wall Street, Revenant, which is his one Oscar win, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And this is just all to say that this is an underrated performance in his career, and I would totally recommend it. It's on Netflix right now, as of like October, whenever I'm recording this. Yeah, go watch it. It's really good. I like it. Enjoy. Next up, Body of Lies, the 2008 Ridley Scott movie. Yet another huge name director Leo has now worked with. A few more and his punch card's filled. He gets a free sandwich. No, sorry, but let's keep this light, because, you know, needing to find these movies sometimes wears me down, and watching them wears me down too. And I try not to spend too much money to rent some of these films, and I found this film particularly on a real obscure streaming service that happened to be playing it free with ads. And I'm not against having ad breaks. Sometimes they're not too bad, but here it really got to me. So, like, yeah, I'm going to add some light moments here. I can't say the movie was that good either, but it was interrupted by pretty shameless ads catering to 65-plus individuals with maladies and the miracle products that could save them. And it honestly did kind of depress me watching this gritty 2000s action B-movie with a much bigger budget than it deserved, interrupted every, 10 minutes by the bottom-of-the-barrel capitalist marketing preying on the confused and those in pain. It was a very rough combination overall. It was weird in this way, though, because I can't seem to remember watching infomercials like this since the late 2000s, when I would go to my grandparents' house and I would watch cable TV, and these ads would play, and these ads with the exact same tone and production value. And how fitting that mesothelioma scares and miracle foot exercisers accompanied the time period the film was released, 2008. So I really feel like I was almost kind of like watching this film as if I was watching TV in 2008, which was in a way kind of a nice tone setter for the film. It kind of did bring me back to what it was like to ingest media about 15 years ago. But, you know, this film, like many others at the time, is part of the trend of Hollywood reaction to the War on Terror, one of the main stories we were treated to as Americans in the 2000s post 9/11 news cycle. Examples of this are kind of like the more almost predictive 1999 film Three Kings, Sam Mendes' Jawhead, Generation Kill, Green Zone, and later examples like American Sniper and 12 Strong. And films like The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, I would argue, at the peak of this topic's relevance in Hollywood, all the top of the bunch, tackling the environment and the Middle East and the American military involvement with care and criticism. But Body of Lies is not one of these movies. It is certainly its own story, its own tone, but I don't believe it stacks up to the other films of this era, particularly as it seems to lean in the action-packed half rather than the story half. It's closer at times to the more serious tone scenes of like the first Iron Man movie. The plot. The CIA's hunt is on for a mastermind of a wave of terrorist attacks. Roger Ferris, played by Leo, is the agency's man on the ground, moving from place to place, scrambling to stay ahead of ever-shifting events. An eye in the sky, a satellite link, watches Ferris, and at the other end of that real-time link is CIA's Ed Hoffman, played by Russell Crowe, who we last talked about during The Quick and the Dead. And Ed Hoffman strategizing events from thousands of miles away. And as Ferris nears the target, he discovers trust can be just as dangerous as it is necessary for survival. Body of Lies in theaters this summer. No. Start the movie off, and pretty quickly we get an early Oscar Isaac performance. 2 or 3 years into his serious film career, and 3 years before Sucker Punch and Drive. And during his short scenes throughout the film, you can tell he's a highlight. Only a taste of performances to come from Oscar Isaac. Very nice to see him. Russell Crowe also in it, and he's fine. That's about all I can say. It's fun to see these guys back together. As for Leo, his performance can't be considered anything special. I think here, above most every other action film he's been in, he's filling a space that nearly any muscly leading man could have fit in 2008. Ben Affleck or Matt Damon, Mark Wahlberg, Jake Gyllenhaal, any one of them could have fit this role and just dropped an equal performance to Leo, and not much would have changed. There's this sense that he's just kind of fulfilling the role to make it his own. And, I don't find the accent particularly convincing, and the dialogue doesn't come through with the usual energy Leo brings to a role. And I'm not saying he's supposed to be some, crying, screaming, bombastic character 100% of the time, but here there's just a noticeable drop in, oomph, I guess. I will say it's below Marvin's Room, I think, around that, but it's really only placed here for its blandness. I can't say it's an outright bad performance, it's just bland, and at least Leo has excitement and memorable character development with Marvin's Room, so there's definitely some of its time action editing that's pretty dizzying at times. There's some rough ADR, just very rough ADR at times, some voiceover, and questionable direction choices from Ridley Scott, I guess. He doesn't feel too invested either, to be honest. But, some positive notes for the film. I think the contrast of Russell Crowe's constant domestic setting and Leo's Middle Eastern danger is very intriguing. I honestly don't think they play into that enough, but just having it there is a really cool reminder of the differences between the environments and how all the big decisions are happening far away from anyone who can see what the correct decisions to make are, leading to a complicated relationship between DiCaprio and Crowe. Plus, there's a fun Ben & Jerry's reference about halfway through, which is cool. Woo, Ben & Jerry's, Vermont. There's also a kind of forced romantic storyline in the background with Leo and a local Iranian nurse, played by the incomparable Golshifta Firani, which again, I hope I said right. I say incomparable because she has a stellar performance in Jim Jarmusch's film Patterson with Adam Driver. Check out Patterson. Any day over Body of Lies. It's soulful and beautiful and quiet and great. Anyways, Body of Lies, nothing special. I rank it at number 26. And to be honest, the fact that it's nothing special and forgettable of a movie this late in Leo's career is kind of a rare occasion. In fact, this may be the last time a Leo performance to date ends up falling nearly completely off the radar. Because beyond this point, we have one Leo movie left in the 2000s. And then beyond that, his run in the 2010s, as I've probably said before, is prolific. And as almost every film is remarkably high profile, financially successful, and iconic. Because let me stop and say that I was doing research into these films, and I find it quite fascinating that I started to realize how iconic some of the expressions, costumes, and movements I've come to internalize from Leo's performances. Eating his fist in Wolf of Wall Street, or stumbling around in Revenant, or raising his glass in Gatsby, even the way he just kind of acts with his fingers a lot in the times. I'm not weird for this, please believe me, but watch a Leo movie and look at what he's doing with his hands. And it's a very intentional and eye-leading, and I think, again, it's the little things that make you grow to appreciate him as an actor, I think the kind of nuances he brings to a performance really are what stick in my mind most, honestly, when I think of memorable actors over the last 20 years. But yeah, the 2010s really does an amazing job of solidifying Leo as an adult actor now, but not just that, as an icon, a creator of iconic, memorable moments, roles and characters that stay in your brain. And it's something I think few actors have accomplished, but it's why the third portion of this list will be so exciting. So let's finish this part 2 up. Next up, Revolutionary Road. Sam Mendes' fourth movie behind American Beauty, Road to Perdition, and Jawhead. Based on the debut novel from Richard Yates and the one exception from the Leonardo DiCaprio goatee era, circa 2006 to 2012. And the return to the electric screen relationship of Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, their last collaboration being a little movie called Titanic. And perhaps for some, they might see it as kind of an answer to the question, what if Rose had tried even a little to easily save Jack from that floating debris in the Atlantic? I wouldn't prep yourself for getting that answer, because this is a very different movie and a very different relationship. Or maybe it isn't, because if you look at the opening scene of this film as a symbol for the movie Titanic, a youthful fling that feels deep and meaningful but maybe sours over time. But who knows? Maybe it's kind of saying that these young, youthful romances don't always pan out when introduced to the actual house living and society. The illusion is perhaps shattered, and who better to bring the idea across than one of America's favorite pining romances than Rose and Jack from Titanic? I mean, this is intentional casting here. Plot. It's summer 1955. Frank, Leonardo DiCaprio, and April, Kate Winslet, always see themselves as far removed from the conventionality of suburbia. Yet that is exactly what creeps up on them when they buy a house in Connecticut. He toils 10 hours a day in a job he hates, while she, as a 1950s homemaker, yearns for fulfillment and passion. Rebelling against the torpor of their lives, the couple plan an escape that may push them to their limits. That description is mostly true. For me, to be honest, this feels pretty flat and emotionless at times when it comes to performance, at least for Leo. And not a lot of this can be attributed to the actor's performances. I think it's very much the script and the editing. I wish the script was better, because the themes it's playing with is classic, but it's nothing really new or personable in a way where we connect with the characters. There isn't much to work with, but I still find myself enjoying Kate Winslet, Zoe Kazan, David Harbour, and yes, even Leonardo DiCaprio at times. Sometimes I feel like the direction from Sam Mendes was be cartoony facsimiles of mid-century suburbanites, but I do like how the movie displays the flawed ideologies of the neat and perfect 50s American dream. But yeah, I like Leo in this well enough. I think it's an underwhelming performance to an extent, but I think when he actually has room to breathe and kind of just riff around, like at his workplace, the Knox office, or when in social situations, he plays the most engaging man in the room in so many of his movies. But I'm happy this time around it feels a bit different. He's not Gatsby in this. He's not Frank Abagnale. He's someone new, and I do dig that. But it's not like a revelation either. Plus that "you're a man" line when they first talk about Paris in the beginning just feels really weird. Or maybe I'm not picking up on some weird sarcasm. Anyways, I rank Revolutionary Road relatively low as well, at number 24. Now, 2008 is an interesting era for Leo, too, because perhaps this is the final movie of his is basically not a mega hit. This is it, because after this is his 8-movie run in the 2010s. So beyond this, almost every film is a household name. And thus ends Part 2. So, we start off the third and most recent chapter in Leo's career with his prolific run in the 2010s, marked most notably by his work with huge directors. But one can argue he's been working with mostly big directors basically since Titanic, so what makes this era any different? I'll certainly say that his adult actor status has not changed since films like Departed or Revolutionary Road, but I would argue his 2000s run differs in this specific personal situation from his 2010s run because, I'll be honest, I just like these movies more. I think he was very good in some average movies in the 2000s, and now he's pretty good in some amazing movies in the 2010s, and that's certainly not all of them. There are some bumps in the road, but for me, they are few and far between, especially since we already covered one at the beginning. So we get to skip over Don't Look Up and J. Edgar. Woo! Okay, first up, 2010's Shutter Island. How to describe Leo and Scorsese's fourth movie together. It is an interesting idea for a movie that doesn't pan out for me, and in the process kind of deflates Leo's acting. Man, Leo looks so exhausted and strung out, and I don't blame him. Because here's a fun fact. Because of the film's disturbing scenes, DiCaprio had nightmares of mass murder during production and considered relaxing with his friends therapy. After playing demanding roles in what I like to call his What Is Real year, Shutter Island and Inception in 2010, DiCaprio actually took a small break from acting to have some time for himself, which has been something we honestly haven't really seen up to this point. He knowingly and intentionally took a break from acting, even if it was just for a couple months. He puts a lot of energy into Shutter Island, and then Inception after this, and this break I think was necessary for what he's able to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years, which is pretty legendary, and him recharging probably helped with that. But back to Shutter Island. I don't have much to say about this. There's a certain blandness to the film that leaves me pretty unengaged, whether it's the predictability of the plot, deflated sense of tension that really isn't there for me. And I think a lot of people often take issue with the ending of this movie, and I understand the arguments, but also am not a fan of this ending. I won't spoil it, but because maybe you want to watch it, but this one is really not for me. It's a lower down in the ranking for Leo. I don't know, I think this film lives or dies on the tension it tries to build, and without it, I guess this all just lands as an unengaging watch. I think it kind of suffers from some of the issues Gangs of New York kind of has when it comes to like the shallowness kind of Leo's performance, for me at least. So I rank it at number 23. Moving on to the other 2010 film in Leo's filmography, Inception. Ah yes, the coveted Leonardo DiCaprio and Christopher Nolan collaboration that had the whole world talking and also had them confused for many years. One of the most iconic films in Leo's career, and some aspects of his performance definitely live up to it. And if I have to say what most impresses me, it's probably the physicality of the role. It is, in my opinion, the final film of his action movie era, and this era of his career certainly goes out with a bang. The jumping and flipping and stunts and choreography, some done by stunt double, yes, but others clearly done by Leo himself, is pretty amazing. Like, it's probably some of the best Leo stunts we've been treated to up to now, and it's cool. There's a lot of just exposition in the film. I mean, later era Nolan films tend to run that issue sometimes. Yes, it's not for everybody, but I think Leo plays off his dialogue pretty smoothly. Like, he's really training Ariadne to design a dream, or really explaining to his crew that he's totally not still obsessed with his dead wife. Guys, I'm fine, really. She's not coming into missions with us. But anyways, yeah, Leo plays Cobb, his character, in a very convincing way, and I appreciate it. I mean, he's playing a man lost in a memory, and it's just really effective. I think for me, this is actually one of my favorite movies on this list in general. It's a top 3. And I do love me some Inception, but I think a partial reason for that is actually the fact that the film is not really a Leo vehicle. It doesn't lean on the presence of this actor. He just fits really well into a fantastic ensemble of performance. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Elliot Page, Michael Caine, Tom Hardy, Ken Watanabe, Cillian Murphy, Marion Cotillard, the list just goes on and on. All good performances. So perhaps he's not the main feature of the film for that, and I like the movie more than his performance. I'll say that a lot of my initial knowledge of Leo as an actor came from this movie. I first watched it when I was 11 or 12, and I knew who Leo was, and I can't think of a movie I'd seen before this one with him in it. Perhaps I'm biased, but overall the film, I think, is lucky to have him, and he's lucky to have the film. I think for many, this seemed like an eventuality, DiCaprio and Nolan teaming up for something, but the fact that Inception, a film on memory and time, a dead wife, classic Nolan stuff, paired with Leo's more serious, less explosive character traits, really comes together for something cool. It's a better film than it is performance, in my opinion, but certainly higher up on the list, as the Marion Cotillard death scene in the hotel room with Leo freaking out is burned in my mind. Him on the windowsill in my head, that might be like my most iconic Leo moment. Like, I can't get over that. That, and I guess now that insanity in The Beach. So I rank Inception at number 11. Moving on, J. Edgar, skip. Moving on to 2012's Django Unchained, the first collaboration with Quentin Tarantino, and at this time, his foray into Western blaxploitation dark comedy. Y'all know this one. Leonardo DiCaprio as Calvin Candy, the big baddie of the film, a truly unredeemable evil character. Leo, he never really sunk his teeth quite this deep into that kind of pure evil, I think. At least not since, Don's Plum. And it's fun and crazy and a spectacle to witness. But it is one of his more iconic roles, too. And the film boys of the world really love it. I would argue legitimately that Django is one of the prettiest films in Tarantino's filmography. It feels like a cool, unofficial sequel to the revenge narrative of Kill Bill. So a film like this is something completely in Tarantino's wheelhouse. And yet it is probably my least favorite of his, personally. It's definitely near the bottom. But not for any of the acting performances. I think the characters created here are pretty striking, iconic, witty, and Leo is definitely no exception to this. From the first time we meet him in the Caesar room of the Cleopatra Club, we see Leo presented as not any of the cartoonish demons of the fun-loving first hour of the film. No, we have been introduced to a tonal shift, a serious threat in what we ought to see is closer to the devil himself, a true evil, Calvin Candy of Candyland. He is more clever, he's more skeptical, and he has only gotten to the place he has by being skeptical and untrusting, and always being in a situation where he remains with the upper hand. And the fact that the main plot of the film is Django trying to keep up the ruse of the film, not letting Candy see beyond him and Schultz's deception, and slowly the tension only rises and rises and rises, and yeah, it leads to an amazing climax and overall tense watch. The film also may give us one of the best scenes Leo ever had in recent times. I think I'll par with him and his mother in Basketball Diaries, or his speeches in Wolf of Wall Street. I mean, we get the dinner scene at Candyland, where I'm sure most of you know, Leonardo DiCaprio famously cut his hand during a take, smashing, I think, on a glass or something, and he continued through the scene. So much of the blood you see in the film is Leonardo's actual blood. Cool. I mean, gruesome and dangerous, but cool. Fun, edgy acting trivia is cool. Despite all the flaws, that I see in the film a lot, and the uncomfortable use of racial slurs and pretty graphic violence, I can't say that a single actor, leading, supporting, or extra doesn't legitimately bring their A game to this movie. Every person that ever graces the screen is just locked in, and that goes for Leo too. And bravo on another polarizing, striking, memorable performance that continues his runs of films in the 2010s strong. I rank it at number 13. This might seem kind of low to people. I know this is a beloved performance of his, but I truly prefer the 12 performances above this to Django. But listen, when you're this high in your Leo ranking, it's still awesome. They're all just pretty cool. So next up, 2013, and The Great Gatsby. I just kind of realized Leo and Baz Luhrmann are doing films for the average American high schooler reading list. All we need now, what are they? Romeo and Juliet and Gatsby. They could do The Odyssey with Leo as Odysseus. Baz Luhrmann's Huck Finn, which Leo, I guess, as Huck's dad, a belligerent drunk. That could be interesting, maybe. I don't know. Well, for now, we have Romeo and Juliet, and this next film with a couple collaborations in it. Not only the second with Australian film director Baz Luhrmann, and his third on-screen collab with longtime friend Tobey Maguire. So fun to see these two together in arguably their best movie, easily placed above This Boy's Life and Don's Plum. And this Great Gatsby film, and Gatsby, is great. Truly larger-than-life performance for Leo. I mean, he's huge, affluent. This is one of the quintessential roles for Leo, in my opinion. And this was the other one I knew him for when I was a kid. I had seen Inception when I was 11 or 12, and then Gatsby and Romeo and Juliet in my English class, the next year. And I think I watched Titanic at some point, like right after. I don't remember when I watched Titanic. It was at some point. But, you know, it's another example of a character who is so good at lying their way upwards with unwavering confidence. Arguably one of the classic examples of this archetype in classic literature. I've always been of the mindset that this book specifically, you know, The Great Gatsby, is like difficult to adapt. And Baz Luhrmann really pulls a lot of the overt imagery and analogies from the text. And I would argue the film kind of suffers for it. But the film is so jam-packed with insanity. The music, the VFX, the hyper-stylization that is kind of like Baz Luhrmann's calling card. You kind of forget what the film's meant to be about, besides the aesthetic of the film, the vibes of the film. And talk about iconic, insane moments. Just take a look. This right here, this is perhaps a top 3 acting moment for Leo ever in popularity.
I still haven't met Mr. Gatsby.
No one's met him. They say he's third cousin to the Kaiser and second cousin to the devil.
I'm afraid I haven't been a very good host, old sport. You see, I'm Gatsby.
It's this, I'm Flying Jack from Titanic, and I don't know, maybe the bear attack from Revenant, or like spinning the top from Inception. Like again, 2010's Leo, filled with jam-packed, iconic performances. But yeah, Leo is a sight to behold in this film. I mean, just like Romeo and Juliet, I think he really plays into that hectic atmosphere. He is as much a part of the environment as the extravagant parties or the bustling urban sprawl of New York and Long Island. And behind all the bells and whistles and distractions, Leo is magnetic on screen, with moments of intense joy and soft introspection. I think he captures who Gatsby is pretty well, and I love that. It's a great fit for him, so hell yeah, good time. I rank it at number 9. And that's something that sounds high in my head as I'm saying it, because I kind of don't love this movie that much. It's full of issues in some ways, but I really try and keep my eye on the ball, and I think that Leo's performance here, it really is a great one. So, moving on, The Wolf of Wall Street.
See those little black boxes? They're called telephones. I'm gonna let you on a little secret about these telephones. They're not gonna dial themselves, okay? Without you, they're just worthless hunks of plastic. Like a loaded M16 without a trained Marine to pull the trigger. And in the case of the telephone, it's up to each and every one of you, my highly trained Stratonites, my killers who will not take no for an answer, my fucking warriors who will not hang up the phone until their client either buys or fucking dies!
Leo's fifth collab with Scorsese, and maybe his most bombastic and honestly fun performance perhaps of his whole career. It's the themes of his other roles legitimately put on drugs, and it's beautiful. Every scene of his meteoric rise, his excessive time on top, and his tailspin downward. Despite this being yet another Scorsese film, yet another youthful character lying upwards to massive success with unwavering confidence, despite it all feeling like the most quintessential Leo movie, there's nothing like it in his whole filmography. And it still feels like something completely new. Old director, old character, new Leo. So I am pretty happy to announce, folks, this is my number 1. Yeah, not sure if that's weird or not, because, I mean, to be honest, it's not even my favorite movie on this list. I think it only ranks like 5th or 6th out of like just favorite movies, regardless of Leo. But yeah, this really is. It's my number 1. I myself was kind of surprised, but I'm like, yeah, I really dig on this thing. It's like a hell of a performance from Leo. I think this movie matches the bonkers, toxic energy of the commercialist banking Wall Street boom of the late 80s, early 90s, and in many ways, Leo as stockbroker Jordan Belfort and Kyle Chandler as the investigating FBI agent Patrick Denham, this feels similar to the dynamic of Leo and Tom in Catch Me If You Can, but Leo is no kid anymore, and the innocence is long gone. For some fun context, in 2007, Leonardo DiCaprio and Warner Brothers won a bidding war for the rights to Jordan Belfort's memoir, The Wolf of Wall Street, with Belfort making $1 million off the deal. Having worked on writing the film's script, Martin Scorsese was considered to direct the film, but abandoned the project to work on Shutter Island instead, also with Leo in it. He describes having wasted 5 months of his life without getting a green light on production dates by the Warner Brothers studio. In 2010, Warner Brothers had offered the directional role to Ridley Scott, with Leo playing the male lead, but the studio eventually abandoned the project. Thank goodness, I would not want to have seen Ridley Scott's Wolf of Wall Street, personally. In 2010, a green light was given by the independent company Red Granite Pictures, imposing no content restrictions. Scorsese, knowing there would be no limits to the content he would produce, came back on board, resulting in an all rating. And this thing is deep all rated, let me tell you. Jeez. Vitamin D powder was used as the fake substance for cocaine in the film, and Jonah Hill was hospitalized with bronchitis due to the snorting large quantities over the course of filming. The film actually set a Guinness World Record for the most instances of swearing in a motion picture. The F word is used 506 times in the film, averaging 2.81 times per minute. The previous record holders were Scorsese's other 1995 film Casino, which had 422 uses of the word, and it has since been broken. The film is actually banned in Malaysia, Nepal, Zimbabwe, and Kenya. Stephen Perlberg of Business Insider actually saw an advanced screening of the film at a Regal Cinemas near the Goldman Sachs building, I believe in New York City, with an audience of financial workers. Perlberg reported cheers from the audience at what he considered to be all the wrong moments, stating, when Belfort, a drug addict attempting to remain sober, rips up a couch cushion to get his secret's coke stash, there were cheers. And I think that last fact, that is the only thing that rubs me the wrong way with this film. It has the opposite effect for the brainless frat bro business majors that worship this movie. I get to watch this thing, personally, as a beautifully excessive takedown of the devilish patriarchal hellscape that is the Wall Street banking district, exposing its flaws and damaging practices, and yet it's so fun. It's such a fun movie. The message that is clear to me can be easily lost on anyone, and I don't blame anyone for that. And actually, to quote the Rotten Tomatoes consensus, the film is funny, self-referential, and irreverent to a fault. But also, to add to that, the consensus also reads Martin Scorsese and Leonardo DiCaprio in their most infectiously dynamic. And yeah, that's got to be the truth. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio in his rarest form here, the energy of the film is so infectious, the tone of the film must have informed that on-set mood. And I think it leads to Leo having a lot of freedom to move about a scene with wild abandon. And some of the stuff Scorsese is able to film and edit together is magical. Just look at Leo's speech in the bullpen near the middle of the film. Amazing. When he's doing the Steve Madden pitch for the IPO. That's insane. It's a very explicit film, too. I mean, this might be his most deeply R-rated performance. Sex, drug use, domestic violence, other various acts of male depravity. It's a pretty visceral display of Leo's talents on being an absolute bastard. But yeah, number one, I mean, this is Leo's greatest performance in my eyes. It's physical, expansive, diverse, excessive, and nuanced. I mean, the dialogue is riveting and inspired, and anytime he's on screen, which is most of the time, you can see the dollar signs in his eyes. I guess I kind of look at it as like it is the 21st century's base id human. Money, sex, drugs, power, and notoriety. Not for the faint of heart, but a lot of iconic moments in this film, a lot of funny moments, and just again diverse performance from high highs and depressive sobering lows. It's a ride and a half, this movie. Also, Leo's dad, it's great. The other Leo dad that we have in any of his movies, Rob Reiner as Leo's dad, and they have a really nice dynamic. I like them together. But yeah, all right, next up, in my opinion, the final entry of Leo's incredible 2010s run. Yes, we have made it to the Oscar-winning performance from Leo, 2015's The Revenant. A rugged, existential look at the relationship of man and nature that Leo has lived off-screen his whole career, being an advocate for environmental justice. Plot. While exploring the uncharted wilderness in 1823, frontiersman Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio, sustains life-threatening injuries from a brutal bear attack. When a member of his hunting team, Tom Hardy, leaves him for dead, Glass must utilize his survival skills to find a way back to civilization. Grief-stricken and fueled by vengeance, the legendary fur trapper treks through the snowy terrain to track down the man who betrayed him. Let's go. Revenge! Some facts about this film. DiCaprio actually found this role very difficult to perform. He had to eat a raw slab of bison's liver and sleep in animal carcasses. He also learned to shoot a musket, build a fire, and speak 2 Native American languages, Pawnee and Arikara, and apply ancient healing techniques. Anyone who has to learn a language for a role just impresses me so much. It's really amazing. So having to learn 2 is amazing. Built on a budget of $135 million, the film actually earned $533 million worldwide. The film received positive reviews with particular praise for DiCaprio's acting. Mark Kermode of The Guardian wrote that DiCaprio shone with a performance that prioritizes physicality over speech. And I could not agree more. That's probably why I liked it so much. So much of the convincing aspects of this film come from a place not centered around dialogue or interaction, but it's the raw and visceral man versus nature archetype the film employs. And man, Leo really shines in that. Is this the one he should have won the Oscar for? Yes. I'm going to say yes. I think he should have also won for other things, but I'm happy he finally got this one. This is a personal favorite, and it actually follows up Wolf of Wall Street in the number 3 position. Number 3. Leonardo DiCaprio has aged so well, and it's crazy I can talk about 2 of my top 3 favorite performances of his career this late in the list. I mean, they're some of his most recent credits. I mean, they feel like an eternity since we got them at this point, but he's continued to impress throughout his entire career. And yeah, I just feel lucky for that. I don't have too much else to say on this movie, to be honest. It's beautifully striking visually. It feels so non-intrusive to the period the film exists in. This is Leo's best role physically, I think. I mean, the toll he must have put his body through and mind through to achieve this performance is so impressive. I think it just shows a dedication and passion that other people 25 years into their chosen profession may not always show. I get lost in the film that it doesn't really feel like DiCaprio anymore, and that's so cool to be able to experience, And as for the director, A.G. Iñárritu, one of my favorites, and I can't wait for Baldo, some new film coming out this year. I think, oh my god, and it's his first one since Revenant. Oh man, I've been missing him. Yeah, Iñárritu did Birdman and Revenant 1 year after another, and this is his first one back, but very excited. Well, now, back to Leo. After this film, he does some documentary narrating, producing, but he actually takes roughly a 4-year break from the silver screen, something he hadn't done previously over his entire career. I mean, he had taken a couple months off after we talked about this, the laborious shooting schedules of Shutter Island and Inception, but nothing this long. And the question, perhaps, post-Oscars win is, what would he follow it up with? Would he even follow it up? There were some questions floating around, for sure. I mean, this is kind of what marks the second half of the 2010s, because it seemed like the right place where he could hang up his career. He had done so much in a span of only 5 years, and the 7 films he did do from 2010 to 2015 could really just solidify him right there as one of the most iconic actors of all age. Cobb, Candy, Gatsby, Belfort, Glass, all year after year of amazing performances. So what next? Well, we would soon find out, as the next film would be only the 3rd time in his career he'd collaborate with a director on a second film, and this time around he'd come back to Quentin Tarantino and his 2019 film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And this is what I would say would be the final film of the third part of Leo's career. And it's a weird little standalone film that feels like spaced out from everything anywhere else. Revenant and Once Upon a Time feel so far apart considering the rate in which Leo was putting out movies in the first half of the decade. So it's hard to connect them. And Don't Look Up, to me, feels much more distant because it was his first and currently only post-pandemic release. So 2019 feels like an island of a year where Leonardo DiCaprio just dropped this one standalone unique performance unlike anything he'd done before, and I appreciate he can still surprise this late into his career. Plot. It's 1969. Actor Rick Dalton gained fame and fortune by starring in a 1950s television western, but is now struggling to find meaningful work in Hollywood that he doesn't recognize anymore. He spends most of his time drinking and palling around with Cliff Booth, his easygoing best friend and longtime stunt double. Rick also happens to live next door to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, the filmmaker and budding actress whose futures will forever be altered by the members of the Manson family. Now, I'm sure most of you clearly know this from, I'm sure you've maybe seen the film, but a lot of people, this grew to a lot of attention because they heard the podcast To Watch to Read discussing this film. And it got a bunch of people really interested in this. And that was, I really attribute To Watch to Read being one of the main reasons that once anyone talks about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood anymore. So I gotta say bravo to Connor and Erica for like opening that dialogue. Sorry. They did talk about it on To Watch to Read. It's a great episode. Connor, I miss you. I'll see you soon. Anyways, back to the movie. I'd say his character, Leo's character, Rick Dalton, is a really intriguing one. And his performance, it's a mature role for him. And I love the fact that Tarantino and DiCaprio really tried to discover the character together. And if you watch interviews with the both of them, you can see how Leo is able to filter the more meandering pop culture deep cut fandom of Tarantino, which is what inspired the character, take that information, take that inspiration and craft it into his own person, Rick Dalton. And that right there makes this a top 10 performance for Leo because of just the mere control of his character and the charm that he can bring to his role and the flaws he makes sure to accentuate within Rick's place in the greater Hollywood acting camp of 1969. But it's not without its issues as well. And what feels like the end of an era, this may be one of the last times we see any youthfulness whatsoever in Leo's performance. It's also just full of really fun moments. I mean, for starters, getting that amazing clip from 14 Fists of McCluskey, a fake film that actor Rick Dalton was in. Leo, is an absolute riot, an eye patch covered American military officer sneaking into Nazi high command with a dream in his heart and a flamethrower on his back.
Anybody order fried sauerkraut?
And the film is full of these fun, cheeky moments with Leo. Look at his work with Julia Butters, or his friendship with Cliff, or just the overall nuanced confusion Leo infuses into Rick's interactions throughout the film. I think Leo plays the roles so well, and yet there's this certain lacking there, as that non-traditional story structure begins to dig into it. Leo really feels like an aging has-been, always a bit wary of the world that's passing him by, and he feels like he's always not understanding something. There's a little hesitation and nervousness that is so dang well executed, and it makes for one of Leo's much better roles. And yet it does rank a bit lower on my ranking for the fact that sometimes the sheen kind of fades when Leo tends to ham up the character a bit too much. The duller parts of Rick Dalton become accentuated into more of a drama queen caricature, and consider the fact that Rick Dalton in other texts is confirmed as bipolar if you look at the book that came out in kind of conjunction with the film. And this portrayal of bipolar disorder is itself sometimes inconsistent to me, I suppose. I mean, take a scene like Rick and Cliff outside Musso and Frank's. Great scene, great character work. That scene, that ain't every scene, no. It's hard to pin down, but some scenes resonate more to me as the Rick Dalton that fits the story. And some feel like the Rick Dalton that was written more into scenes for the sake of seeing more Rick Dalton. And it only works most of the time. And that issue with such an open plot line comes back. You know, this Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has this meandering sense about the film that is equal parts refreshing and equal parts infuriating, because the scenes of Rick Dalton on set of Lancer can just like drag on, and man, you think it means something, but the fact that it's happening is the meaning, and sometimes it just is not enough to justify the moment. As much as I love the movie, sometimes it just feels like the production team just wanted to recreate LA in 1969, and they happened to shoot some scenes while they were there on set and put it together into a movie. But I'll say this. In the same way that I will say Richard Linklater really knows how to write for Jack Black, like in School of Rock or Bernie, Tarantino knows how to write for Leo. Their two collaborations yielded exciting and memorable results. One obviously a bit more explosive than the other, but I wouldn't want another Calvin Candy anyways. I love the diversity. So yeah, Leo I think gets to dig his hands pretty deep into the bag of Hollywood history and comes out with some pretty fun and creative results. Just Great Escape scene alone, so fun. I rank Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, if you didn't already guess, by the one remaining open slot, at number 8. And then we get Don't Look Up, but yeah, that's it. That is all. That's the end of the episode. Right now we have one confirmed shot film. There was a film that has been shot that Leo was in, that he stars in, that we will be getting any day now. As of like right now, there's no confirmation. There's no confirmation on whether it's going to be in a month or a couple months or a year, who knows. But I'm talking about Leonardo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese's 6th collaboration together on a movie. And it's probably going to end up being 2023 unless they really do like a Christmas release for the awards show. But I'll say right now, 2023's Killers of the Flower Moon. And I think when I'm looking at that movie, when I see the couple of stills and I look at the story, this is, again, I think this may be a new era of a clearly older and honestly middle-aged, back pains and retirement plans era of Leo's career. And I hope that kind of humbling does something for his acting. I want to see how he adjusts to that. But yeah, we've reached the end. That is my ranking of every single Leonardo DiCaprio performance to date. I guess if I can give final thoughts, I gotta say I respect the career this guy has had. And wow, what a treat to look at them all. And hey, does it pan out every time? No, of course not. But damn it, if he really is at least trying a little in every film he does, and I can respect that. Now, there's only one film on the horizon for Leo. It's Killers of the Flower Moon. Yeah, I'm excited. I don't have any like specific hopes for him as an actor, but other than I hope he continues to try and find stuff that interests him and keeps him engaged and excited as an actor. And I wonder now at the end of this months-long project, who is this guy? Who have I grown to respect so much as an actor? I gotta say, I mean, there's something really intriguing, and one day perhaps we'll know more about him, but he seems to try his best to maintain the few regular relationships he has, and lives far away from the public eye as, for lack of any better term, a regular guy with friends and family, but the added caveat of superstardom will always be a looming aspect of his existence. He can't go unrecognized. He can't go unnoticed or undiscussed. I mean, look at Titanic, being like 24 years old, and your fate is sealed as an A-lister, as like a notable face, one of the biggest films. And that was 25 years ago now. And I mean, who knows what that does to a human's head? I can't imagine. But within all of this, man, we've gotten some crazy movies. I am so excited for what he does later on in his career, as it seems at this point I can't really tell where he's going and what kind of roles he'll fit into of what I would say is part 4 of his career. Will he cling on to his action-packed youthful demeanor like Tom Cruise? Will he embrace his old age and pick mentor roles or characters past their prime? Will he work to be in more films or perhaps less? Will he decide to collaborate with new directors or maybe return to some others that he's worked with before? I mean, who the heck knows? But I'll say this. Consider my ticket pre-purchased for Killers of the Flower Moon. I certainly can't wait to see what one of America's most interesting A-listers does next. So long as it's better than Don't Look Up. No shade, Leo. It's not you. It's the rest of the movie. But to wrap it up, I have a couple extra compendiums to go along with this episode. I've actually created a Letterboxd listing of every DiCaprio film in the order I watched them originally, time-stamped in the notes with extra thoughts, quotes, and fun facts that didn't really fit into the main bit of this episode, as well as some charts, because charts are fun. I like charts. This one here, there it is, shows all the films I've seen, but arranged by my star rating. So basically, it's the ranking, but also says what the star rating is, just how I rate it, so you can kind of see my thoughts on the movie outside of Leo's performance. That chart, I think, yields some interesting differences. I mean, just look at the fact that Don's Plum and The Departed are right next to each other. That's kind of crazy. And then also, here's a chronological bar graph of every film and where it stacks up. Things I found interesting, actually, here were that he had a prolific run in 95. If you look at that, insane. And then my part 2 of the series, his 2000s run, easily kind of pretty starkly the most average and my least favorite of the 3 portions of his career, etc. But yeah, if you're interested in those, you can check them out at my Letterboxd account, at least the Letterboxd list at DA_N. That is DA_N. It's linked below. And as always, you can check out Connor's Letterboxd film and list for any film we discussed in the first 4 seasons of the show. I want to end here on just a sound clip of an interview with Leonardo DiCaprio that I found, but until next time, thank you for tuning in to Season 7 and a 3-hour beginning to Season 7, this mammoth episode that I am so happy to have finally finished. But yeah, thank you for tuning in to this ridiculous episode, and have a good rest of your week.
He wants to know the single most important acting lesson you learned from working with Martin Scorsese.
I think that it really look, I've done these films with him, and I've had an incredible opportunity to learn from, one of the greatest artists of our time. But to tell you the truth, I'm so focused on what I'm doing every single day that it's so hard to pick up, people have asked me if I want to direct, but it's so hard to pick up on what he's doing in his process, because I'm off in my own world and then we connect together. But he said something to me in this last movie that was just, he hit it so on the head that everything sort of made sense for me. We were making a film about pretty deplorable characters, pretty unlikable people, with Wall Street in the title, wondering if audiences would at all connect with these characters or this world or go along the journey with them. And he said to me, look, Leo, I've done many films in my life, and I have to say, as long as you're honest and authentic about your portrayal of who these people are, no matter how despicable at times, no matter what part of the darker nature of humanity you're exploring, audiences will always connect with that and go along with that journey with you. And that's what I've found in my career. And I said, shit, that makes sense. I mean, here's a guy that came out of the gate with Mean Streets and did Taxi Driver, Last Temptation of Christ, and that was his that's been his motto in filmmaking, and that's why his films last for such a long period of time. And everything kind of clicked for me with that one comment.